good evening, and welcome back. Tonight we're looking at the Zodiac, not as a horoscope, but as a collection of ancient stories, each stranger and more tangled than you might expect. From the fierce lion to the wandering twins, from the scales of justice to the water-bearer, every sign has a myth behind it, and some of them are far more complicated, tragic, or downright bizarre than the symbols we know today. We'll start at the beginning and work our way through all 12 signs, uncovering the legends, heroes, and gods that gave them life. As always, I'd love to know where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it for you. Whether you're settling down for the night or just looking for a quiet escape into the past, I'm glad you're here. Now, let's begin. If you go outside on a night when the air is crisp and the stars seem sharper than they have any right to be, you might feel that familiar and unshakable pull, your eyes drawn upward, searching, whether you admit it or not, for shapes in the darkness. The ancients called this practice Castor, the art of placing stories into the heavens, and they did not simply look for pretty patterns. They hunted for meaning, for symbols, for pieces of themselves, scattered and pinned to the black vault above their heads. Today we call them constellations, but to the people who first named them, they were not cold and remote collections of burning gas. They were memories, warnings, and promises, frozen moments from stories too big to fit on the earth alone. Among the most enduring of these star-born tales are the 12 signs of the Zodiac, a sequence of constellations strung like beads along the invisible path of the sun, each one with its own tangled knot of myth, history, and in many cases, bizarre twists. The term zodiac comes from the ancient Greek zoidakos kyklo, meaning circle of little animals, which is charming enough until you realize how misleading it is. Yes, there are animals in the lineup such as lions, crabs, and rams, but also a pair of immortal twins, a man pouring water into eternity, a woman with a sheath of wheat, and even an inanimate set of scales. This celestial ring is an odd mixture, and it is not even purely Greek. Its origins stretch back much further to the Babylonians of the first millennium, before the Common Era, who charted the movements of certain constellations along the ecliptic and assigned them symbolic roles. The Greeks, never ones to leave a perfectly serviceable system alone, inherited this framework and rewrote it in their own dramatic idiom. They layered over it a thick coat of divine intrigue, with gods transforming into animals, lovers immortalized in the stars, monsters slain and hoisted heavenward as trophies. And in doing so, they created something that was equal parts calendar, compass, and cosmic scrapbook. But the thing about Greek mythology, especially when welded to something as permanent as the night sky, is that it rarely tells a clean and noble story. These constellations, the ones you might now see reproduced in silver pendants or tattooed in delicate lines on someone's wrist, were not conceived in serenity. They are souvenirs from moments of desperation, vengeance, lust, and catastrophe. Many of them exist because someone, often a mortal, met with a fate so extraordinary or so ghastly that the gods decided to make it a fixture in the heavens. The idea was both a gift and a sentence, a kind of immortality that freezes you forever in the pose of your most defining moment. Whether that moment was triumphant or humiliating, it is no accident that so many of these stories involve transformations at the point of crisis. Men into animals, gods into mortals, mortals into stars, because transformation for the Greeks was both punishment and preservation. Imagine then what it meant for ancient peoples to stand on a quiet hilltop, point toward a crooked scatter of lights, and tell the tale of how those lights came to be. They would speak of heroes who wrestled monsters only to die young, of women wronged by gods and repaid with a place in the sky, of creatures who fought for causes they barely understood and were immortalized in shapes that would outlast every empire on earth. In the telling, these constellations became less like inert decorations and more like living witnesses, silent and glittering archives of the best and worst in the human and divine condition. The zodiac then is not a serene astrological wheel spinning gently above us. It is a battlefield memorial, a love letter, and a gallery of betrayals and last stands. Each sign is a preserved fragment of a larger and messier story, and taken together they form a kind of cosmic anthology of human experience, as refracted through the Greek imagination. We will begin with Aries, the golden ram whose gift was both rescue and doom, and travel the full circle through to Pisces, the twin fish bound by a cord fleeing for their lives. And as we go, we will see how the ancients, with all their flaws and ferocities, chose to mark their world, not just in the marble of temples or the ink of scrolls, but in the permanent and unblinking lights that wheel above our heads every single night. The story of Aries begins not in the heavens, but on the green slopes and smoky hearths of ancient Colchis and Boeotia. In a world where a child's life could be bent or broken by the word of an oracle, and where the gods moved their pieces on the board of mortal affairs without a whisper of apology. To understand why the figure of a ram shines in the night sky at the bee, head of the Zodiac, we must first descend into a tangled web of family rivalry, divine intervention, and the kind of desperate escape that feels less like a triumph and more like a breath stolen before drowning. It begins with a boy named Phrixus and his sister Hela, the children of Atheus, a king of Ba, and Nephil, a cloud nymph sent by the gods to be his bride. Nephil, whose very name meant cloud, was a creation of Hera, shaped in the likeness of another woman to deceive a wandering king. And though she was divine, her life in the mortal palace was neither peaceful nor secure. When Atheus turned his affections to Ino, a mortal woman whose ambition was matched only by her cunning, Neph's place in the royal household faltered. Ino saw the children of Nephil as obstacles to her own son's rise, and the legends tell us she hatched a plan that was as ruthless as it was patient. She conspired to bring famine to the land by secretly spoiling the seed grain before it was sown, forcing the people into desperation. When the king consulted the oracle at Delphi, Ino bribed the messengers to return with a false prophecy that the famine could only be lifted if Phrixus, the king's own son, was sacrificed to the gods. In that moment, the machinery of doom began to turn, and Phrixus, still a boy, found himself standing on the altar. The knife ready, the crowd hushed, the air thick with the smell of fear and incense. But the gods, or perhaps one god in particular, had other designs. Nephil, far from powerless, called upon a miraculous creature to intervene. A ram with fleece spun from gold and wings strong enough to lift the weight of 2 children. This was Chrysalis, a gift from Poseidon, or Hermes, depending on which storyteller you follow. And its sudden appearance on the altar was so shocking that the priests dropped their knives, and the crowd fell back in awe. The ram knelt in vibe, ting Phrixus and Hela to climb onto its broad back, and with a surge of muscle and wind, it leapt into the sky. Imagine the roar of the sea below them, the wind tearing at their clothes, the dizzying glitter of the sun on the waves as they left the land of their birth behind. This was not a leisurely ascent to glory. It was a flight for survival, and the danger was not yet done. Their path took them eastward toward the distant land of Cultis, but the journey was not without loss as they crossed a narrow strait between the Aegean and the Black Sea. Hela, perhaps overcome by the height, perhaps too weak to hold on, slipped from the ram's back and fell into the waters below. That place became known forever as the Hellespont, the Sea of Hela, a name carved into maps, as a reminder that even in stories where gods intervene, not all are saved. Alone now, Phrixus clung to the ram as it carried him to Cultis, where King Attis, the son of the sun god Helios, received him with unexpected generosity. In gratitude to the gods for his rescue, Phrixus did something both reverent and strange. He sacrificed the golden ram itself to Zeus, ending the life of the very creature that had saved his own. The fleece, impossibly radiant, was hung in a sacred grove guarded by a dragon, where it would one day lure Jason and his Argonauts into their own perilous tale. The placement of Aries in the sky is both tribute and testimony. The Greeks believed that Zeus set the ram among the constellations to honor its courage and service, fixing its form so that each spring as the sun crossed its stars, its story would return. But the truth in the telling is complicated. This is not only a story of salvation, but of loss, of a sister's drowning, of a hero who lives because a god chose to spare him, and of the sacrifice of a faithful rescuer. To the ancients, Aries was a reminder that rescue often comes at a cost, that survival is never without its debts, and that the heavens remember both the shining moments and the shadows that fall beside them. When the Greeks looked upward and traced the curve of stars we now call Aries, they were not merely seeing the outline of a horned animal. They were recalling a chain of events in which a kingdom's politics, a stepmother's spite, a god's intervention, and the courage of a mythical creature had collided in one moment of desperate escape. Aries rises in the eastern sky, at the turning of the year towards spring, when the earth begins to shrug off the damp lethargy of winter and life returns to the fields. To the ancients, this was no coincidence. The ram was not only a savior, but also a herald, the first to arrive in the zodiac cycle, leading the parade of constellations that marked the agricultural year. Its reappearance in the night sky was a silent announcement that it was time to prepare the plow, to trust that warmth would return, and to remember that survival was possible even after long months of scarcity. In the Greek imagination, Aries carried more than the weight of Phrixus's rescue. It became a symbol for bold beginnings, the kind of courage that does not pause to calculate the odds before leaping into the unknown. The ram's leap from the altar, its wings slicing through the air, became a model for decisive action when hesitation would mean death. This was not the quiet patience of Virgo, nor the measured balance of Libra, but the sudden and necessary force that could tear a person out of danger and set them on an entirely new path. In astrology, much later, Aries would be associated with the traits of leadership, energy, and a certain impulsive fearlessness. Yet in the original myth, those qualities belong not to the human hero, but to the animal itself, the divine creature that acted without question when called. Yet Eve, in celebration, the myth carries shadows. The very act that immortalized Aries also contains loss. Hela's fall into the sea, the sacrifice of the ram in the grove of Aries, the loneliness of Phrixus in a foreign land. It is as if the constellation exists to remind mortals that beginnings are rarely clean. They are often born from endings, from severed ties, and irreversible choices. The Golden Fleece, which later became the prize of Jason and his Argonauts, was itself a relic of that cost. Every retelling of their voyage pulled the thread back to Aries, to the shining wool once draped over a creature that had carried a boy from death to life and then laid down its own life without resistance. To the Greeks, placing Aries in the heavens was an act of both gratitude and record-keeping. The ram's shape was fixed in the unchanging sphere, so that every year at the same season, its story would be rehearsed in the minds of those who tilted their heads to see it. The stars that marked its horns and back were like letters in a permanent inscription, written across the sky instead of on stone, impossible for wind or rain to erode. It was a way of telling the future through the past. If the ram had come once in a moment of peril, perhaps its return in the spring sky meant that help could come again, unseen until the very moment it was needed. And so Aries begins the zodiac not with the perfection of a creation myth, but with the messy human reality of survival. It starts the cycle with a rescue that does not save everyone, with a hero who is not a hero in the usual sense, with a creature that performs its duty only to vanish into the realm of memory. That is the truth the Greeks wove into their constellations, and it is the truth that still lingers when Aries rises over the horizon. That courage often arrives in the form we least expect, that rescue is not without cost, and that then in loss, the act of leaping into the air, into the unknown, can change everything. When the Greeks lifted their eyes to the slow, broad sweep of stars that form the shape we call Taurus, they were not simply tracing the outline of an animal. They were stepping into one of the most unsettling and magnificent episodes in the long and uneven record of Zeus's pursuits. In the age when the gods still walked among mortals, and the sea was as much a road as the earth, there lived a Phoenician princess named Europa, daughter of King Agenor. Her beauty was not the loud, blazing sort that conquers a room. It was the kind that seemed to carry its own weather, the kind that pulled the eye without effort and made the world around her feel briefly more alive. She lived by the shore in a land of warm winds and salt air, and it was there, while gathering flowers with her companions in a meadow that spilled down toward the beach, that her story veered into the eternal. Zeus, looking down from Olympus, saw her and decided that he must have her. This was the kind of decision that for the king of the gods was not weighed or questioned, but acted upon with the certainty of a storm rolling toward shore. Yet Europa was a mortal princess with a guarded life, and Zeus knew that his usual forms of approach would not suffice. So he reshaped himself, abandoning the eagle, the cloud, the flame, and becoming instead a bull, a white bull of such impossible beauty that even the wary would pause to look. His hide shone as if carved from moonlight, his horns curved like a craftsman's perfect work, and his eyes held a strange gentleness that belied the force coiled in his body. He wandered among the king's grazing herds until he was simply one more animal on the edge of the meadow, waiting. Europa noticed him first for his stillness. While the other cattle moved and tore at the grass, this bull seemed to be watching her, patient, unthreatening. She reached out a hand, and when he did not shy away, her fingers brushed the warmth of his muzzle. Her companions laughed and came closer, marveling at the calm creature who allowed them to drape flowers around his neck and weave garlands between his horns. His breathing was slow, deep, the way the sea breathes before a wave, and when Europa climbed onto his back, it felt no more dangerous than sitting astride a sun-wormed stone. She could not have known that she had already crossed the threshold into myth. The moment she settled, the bull moved not the short, placid steps of a grazing beast, but a sudden, powerful surge toward the shore. The girls shouted, startled as his hooves pounded across the sand, and before they could reach her, he plunged into the surf. The sea rose around them in sprays of white, but the bull did not falter. He struck out into the open water with the strength of something made for both land and sea. Europa clung to his neck, the garland slipping into the waves, her eyes stung by the salt wind, as the coastline dwindled behind her. Dolphins appeared in their wake, leaping in arcs as if escorting royalty, and beneath them the water shifted from green to blue to the deep violet of the open Mediterranean. There is no telling how long they traveled like this, the bull's great body cutting through the waves, the sun shifting overhead, the silence broken only by the rush of water and the sound of her own breath. At last, an unfamiliar shore rose ahead the island of Crete, fragrant with cypress and pine. Here, on solid ground again, the bull's form began to change, the white hide dissolving into the shape of Zeus, his eyes no longer gentle but burning with the victory of possession. On that Cretan shore, Europa's life was altered beyond recognition. She became the mother of 3 sons, among them Minos, who would one day rule Crete and build the labyrinth that held the Minotaur. The bull form that had carried her across the sea was remembered, not in warning, but in honor, and so the Greeks fixed its shape in the sky, not the man, but the animal, head lowered in eternal charge, the stars marking the curve of its horns and the breadth of its shoulders, the rest of its body fading into the darkness, as if forever emerging from the sea. Taurus was never just a picture scratched across the night for the sake of beauty. To the Greeks, its return in the sky was a signal, a reminder, and a declaration all at once. It rose in the seasons when the earth was waking from winter's quiet, when pastures filled again with the sound of animals grazing, when plows began to bite into the soil. The presence of the bull among the Zodiac was more than the shadow of Zeus's abduction of Europa. It was the sign of fertility, of strength returning to the fields, of the raw power that tilled and sustained life. The constellations' brightest stars, the warm red glow of Aldebaran at the bullseye, and the cluster of the Pleiades shimmering near its shoulder were not just ornaments, but markers by which sailors timed their voyages and farmers judged their planting. In a world without mechanical clocks, these were the living hands of the year's great dial. But Taurus's meaning did not stand on a single myth alone. The Greeks, like the Babylonians before them, layered their constellations with more than one story, and the bull carried traces of other older tales. Some saw in its horns the reflection of the Cretan bull, the same animal that Hercules was sent to capture as one of his labors, a beast whose capture was not a simple act of hunting, but a confrontation with something untamed, something that belonged both to land and to God. Others found in its massive form the shadow of a darker Episo. Day, the bull that Pasiphae, cursed by Poseidon, was made to desire, bringing into the world the Minotaur, a half-man, half-bull child, who would one day stalk the labyrinth beneath Minos's palace. The Greeks were not concerned that these stories contradicted one another. The sky could hold them all, each one a facet of the shape they traced in the darkness. In the temples and marketplaces, Taurus was invoked with a mixture of awe and familiarity. Bulls were not rare in the mortal world. Farmers yoked them, priests sacrificed them, artisans carved them into altars, but the bull in the sky was something else entirely. It was the perfected image, the archetype, the eternal bull that never aged, never weakened, never bowed to the plow. To place it in the heavens was to strip away the dust and sweat of the animal and leave only the power, the force that could cross seas with a girl on its back, that could bear God's curses without breaking, that could anchor the turning of the year itself. When Taurus rose in the east, just after sunset, in the old calendar months, it was like a great gate swinging open in the sky. The horns pointed forward, the head lowered as though charging into the months ahead. In those same nights the Hyades cluster would glitter faintly like raindrops in the bull's face, a sign to the Greeks that the season of storms was beginning, that the skies would water the seeds in the ground. These patterns were practical tools for navigation and agriculture, yes, but the Greeks could not look at them without also recalling Europa's ride across the waves, without remembering the strangeness of a god choosing to wear an animal's skin. Every bright star was a spark of that story. The stillness in the meadow, the sudden surge to the shore, the foam breaking over horns as they cut through the surf. In the older Mediterranean world, before the Greek poets gave Zeus's name to the rider of the bull, the animal itself had been sacred in a dozen other tongues. The Minoans danced with them in ritual vaulting, leaping over their horns in feats that seemed more prayer than sport. The Babylonians saw in Taurus the force that marked the start of their new year, the great beast that stood guard at the gates of spring. The Greeks inherited all of this without discarding any of it, folding it into the version they carried forward. Their Taurus was both a stolen moment between a god and a mortal, and the distilled image of animal strength that every culture along the sea's rim had already revered. To the night watcher, in a Greek port or on a mountain farm, Taurus's shape in the sky was both familiar and untouchable. You could own a bull, harness it, feed it, even slaughter it for sacrifice. But the one above, the one with eyes made of fire and shoulders wide enough to carry the weight of a season, was beyond your reach. And when its horns cut their way across the black dome of the sky, each year they cut a line between what was mortal and what was eternal, between the herds in the pasture and the single flawless bull that would never die. It was not Zeus they fixed in the heavens, nor Europa, nor Minos, but the form that made them all possible. The bull itself, forever moving, forever leading the charge into the next turning of the year. The constellation of Gemini is drawn from a story so deeply bound to the Greek sense of kinship and honor that it resists being reduced to a single moment. To trace its shape in the night is to enter the life of two brothers, Castor and Pollux, whose bond carried them beyond the reach of ordinary mortality. Their story begins in the royal household of Sparta, where their mother, Queen Leia, was known across the Iron not only for her beauty, but for the strange and divided fate of her children. On the same night, fathers claimed her bed, King Tyndareus, her mortal husband, and Zeus, who came to her disguised in the form of a swan. From this union, two sets of twins were born. Helen and Pollux were said to be children of Zeus, touched with immortality. Castor and Clytemnestra were born of Tyndareus, entirely mortal. It was a family whose bloodline was already a tangle before their lives had even begun. Castor and Pollux grew as inseparable companions. They trained in the arts that shaped noblemen: wrestling, hunting, the handling of horses, the tactics of war. Each boy's skill complemented the others. Castor was famed for his mastery with horses, his balance and strength in combat, his precision with the spear. Pollux was unmatched in boxing, his blows carrying the weight of divine blood. Together they formed a partnership that could not be challenged in the lists or on the battlefield. Their fame spread beyond Sparta. Poets sang of their exploits. Sailors called on them for protection at sea, swearing they had seen the brothers' figures appear in stormlight to guide their ships toward safety. Yet no mortal life, no matter how gifted, was free of the quarrels that plague men. The brothers became entangled in a dispute over women with their cousins, Adidas and Lines. Versions of the tale differ, but all agree it was a matter of pride and possession. Two pairs of warriors convinced of their own right, unwilling to yield. The quarrel swelled into violence. Spears flew, and in the clash that followed, Castor was struck down. His body fell not as that of a hero in the heat of victory, but as that of a brother watching his own life slip into the shadows. Pollux fought on until his enemies lay dead or scattered. Yet when the dust settled, he found no comfort in survival. Standing over Castor's body, Pollux felt the full weight of the immortality he carried. It was a gift he had never asked for, and now it felt like a sentence. For what use was eternal life when half of himself was gone? He turned to Zeus, not as a worshipper making a plea to a god, but as a son speaking to a father, and begged to share his immortality with Castor. In some tellings, Zeus granted him the request by dividing their existence. The brothers would spend one day among the gods in Olympus and the next in the underworld, among the shades, never to be wholly separated again. In others, Zeus raised them together into the night sky, fixing their likenesses side by side where no blade could part them. The stars of Gemini became their eternal likeness, two bright points standing close in the darkness, each carrying the memory of the other. To the Greeks, they were not simply guardians of sailors or patrons of athletes. They were proof that devotion could overcome the finality of death, that a bond forged in life might hold even beyond the grave. The sight of those twin stars at the edge of night was a reminder of a vow kept at the highest cost, a loyalty that neither war nor the will of the gods could undo. To the people who named the sky and read it like a ledger, the two bright points that mark the heads of Gemini were never just conveniences for navigation or ornaments pinned to the black. They were a living presence made visible. A compact between brothers shone in firelight. And every time they rose together, just after dusk in the clear weather of late winter, a murmur passed through harbors and hill towns, because Castor and Pollux had returned, the Dascurii standing their silent watch again over streets and fields and mastheads. A reassurance that what had been promised in an hour of grief would be honored as many times as the year could bear. Their names traveled farther than most men ever would, carried in the mouths of sailors who were not poets, and yet spoke like poets. Hen storms lifted the sea into walls, and the rigging shook and the world narrowed to the length of a deck. For in that hour, even the irreligious saw a strange blue shimmer crawling along spars and stays, a cold flame that did not burn the hand and did not obey the wind, and they said that the twins had come, that Castor and Pollux were with them, that loyalty itself had stepped aboard, and captains made vows aloud to gods they could not see, because the sight of twin lights on a mast in a hard blow turns the heart from calculation to gratitude. This reputation did not begin with fishermen and merchantmen. It had been earned in older stories that moved like a current beneath the later piety. Stories of the voyage of the Argo, when the sea itself seemed to decide whether the ship would live or sink, and a Boxer king named Amycus demanded that any who set foot on his shore must face him with fists alone. A demand that was answered without bravado by Pollux, who met him in the sand while the crew stood as a ring, and the surf counted out the rounds. And when the king lay broken, the Argonauts went back to their work with the unsentimental calm of men who know storms do not respect victory. There followed a night when wind and water agreed to end the expedition, and the first tiny fires crept over the yard arms, and men who had never prayed learned how. And the twins were said to have stood shudderto in the lightning, as if the sky were only another arena, and the storm relented just enough that oars could bite and the keel could keep her line. From such episodes, the cult of the brothers gathered its weight, so that later, when a small craft met beyond its build, and an old steersman whispered their names, and the glow returned, the crew believed that the favor of Castor and Pollux was not an accident, but the continuation of a pledge made long ago. On land, their figures did work of a different kind, teaching with the authority of image rather than command, And in Sparta, where boys learned to trust the man to their right as they trusted their own hands, the Dioscuri were the faces carved on temple friezes and painted on shields, riders with lances leveled, horsehair crests catching a sculptor's panting wind, the pattern of two made into an emblem of how a line should hold. They had sanctuaries where bread and wine were set out each year, as if for honored guests, and there were feasts called Theoxenia, in which the brothers were invited to recline as companions at a table that remained empty to the eye. The city acting out its belief that friendship requires ceremony if it is to outlast fear. In Athens they were addressed as the Anarchis, the lords, and had their own precinct, and in small towns far from the arguments of the great plays, there were little shrines with rough pillars and 2 stars scratched into soft stone, so that a shepherd on a ridge or a traveler in a bad pass could pause and remember that strength comes in pairs, and that the gods remember those who do not abandon one another. Their fame crossed the straits with settlers into Italy, where Romans, who were hard to impress and slower to love, took to the twins with unusual speed, building a great temple to Castor and Pollux in the Forum and laying down a procession of horsemen each year that flowed like a river of bronze down the streets. Young men of the equestrian order riding 2 by 2 beneath the July sun to the steps of the sanctuary, where they dismounted and offered thanks for the discipline that keeps formations from breaking and panic from spreading. When an army learns things about itself that it had hoped never to know, coins bore their faces or their helmets topped with stars, an official memory ringing from hand to hand through markets and taverns. And if you lay the coin flat and let it catch the light, you can almost see the argument it makes, that a city is safest when it holds up examples of brothers who keep a promise, even when the gods change the terms. This notion seeped into oaths before games, into the quiet rituals of departure at city gates, into the reluctance of craftsmen to sign their work with a single name when two had shared the labor. The twins appeared in poems that were recited at banquets, and in laws that rewarded men who bore the burden of another's crime or returned a fallen comrade's body rather than counting the odds for their own escape, because every society teaches by example more effectively than by statute. And the example of Castor the horse tamer and Pollux the boxer was a way to say aloud that devotion is not sentiment but habit, a daily readiness to step forward when stepping back would be easier. Their myth carried a precision that made philosophers nervous, for immortality is usually a simple state, and yet the brothers lived under an arrangement that divided their days between the sunlight of Olympus and the dark of Hades, and audiences did not miss the unease of that arrangement. The detail mattered because it did not flatter. It suggested that even a gift from Zeus can be a burden when the one you love cannot share it fully. And so the bargain becomes a rhythm, a procession of mornings and midnights in which companionship is preserved at the cost of rest, as if the sky itself were asked to alternate between feast and funeral so that a vow could remain intact. This is why the sight of their stars, side by side, did not feel like reassurance alone. It also felt like an instruction in the costs that words draw down when spoken in earnest, a reminder that the best pledges complicate a life rather than simplifying it, and that the meaning of a name endures only in essay, so far as someone pays for it with days and nights and breath. Astronomers who kept calendars for farmers and pilots wrote their appearances carefully, observed that the brighter of the pair, which later ages called Pollux, rose with a warm steadiness, while the other, called Castor, seemed a little whiter and colder, and they sat down the way the twins stood among winter's bright company, near the white dog and the great hunter and the charioteer, with his sharp star above the shoulder. A geometry that made sense to those who sailed by constellations rather than by instruments, and that also made sense to those who swayed barley and watched for decent weather to shear sheep. When the twins cleared the eastern roofs in the long, cold evenings, it was time to consider certain tasks and postpone others, to mend hulls that would cross dangerous water in spring, to call crews together and share out the terms of profit and loss before tempers frayed at sea. The same pair shone high at midnight when the year leaned hard toward its turning, steady companions in the clear vault over mountain snow, and shepherds, who spoke in proverbs, said that a flock fares better when men remember the twins and pair the young with the experienced rather than trusting to luck. In painted pottery and stone reliefs and the small bronze mirrors tucked into the chests of wealthy women, you can see how artists work the story into the curves and edges of daily life. The two young men shone, seated together with spears grounded between their knees, or riding side by side with the quiet satisfaction of men who do their work without any audience, or standing with stars above their hair, as if they had only just come down from their place to look at something that needed attention. These images were domestic and public at once, a language that repeated itself from banquet hall to stable yard, so that boys, had not yet chosen their friends, and men who had chosen badly were both reminded that the world expects you to hold to the one who stands with you. The brothers appear also in the old tales of their sister. For when Helen was taken from Sparta by Theseus, while still very young, Castor and Pollux marched into Attica, recovered her from Aidna, and took Theseus's mother, Ara, away in her place. An act that told the Greeks that the twins were protectors of family honor and also participants in the rough arithmetic of reprisals that governed the age. And later, when a cattle raid turned into a feud with their cousins, Edis and Lancus, that arithmetic ran to its limit, and Castor fell, and Pollux chose to answer death by distributing his life across two realms so that the partnership could hold. Epithets followed them like banners, saviors of sailors, tamers of horses, guardians of youths, patrons of the way the body learns skill through repetition, and the mind learns courage by watching the man beside it refuse to run. Their cult was neither secretive nor ecstatic. It asked for feasting and fair dealing, for twin cups filled to the same mark, for simple justice in contracts and steady hands in the press of battle. When a chorus sang of them at a festival, you hear the balance of their gifts, the one whose knuckles knew the weight of a fist, and the one whose hands knew the language of reins, and somewhere behind the praise, the quiet understanding that they had avoided the poison that often creeps into brothers' hearts when courts and bards and commanders say one is favored. The myth insisted that Pollux' share of divinity did not make him careless with the mortal who matched his stride, and that Castor's mortality did not sour him against the god-blooded youth who shared his bed and bread. All of this made the constellation more than a signpost for the season. It made it a standing instruction, a piece of civic curriculum, conducted in starlight, and if you wanted to teach a boy why he must stay in the line, or return for the fallen, or sit beside a friend who has lost a child, you could point to the two lights that travel together and tell him that the world is kept from ruin as much by paired loyalties as by laws, that when a city is lucky, its men decide to mirror the twins, that when a ship is lucky, the watch on the bow keeps faith with the hand on the tiller because each knows his life is braided with the others. In this way, Gemini became a habit of mind and a discipline of the heart, a way of measuring oneself against a story that refuses to let affection be cheap. And as the brothers' stars cleared the haze over the sea lanes, or hung above frostbright fields, the same thought took root again and again in those who looked up. That devotion remembers the bargain it made, even when the day has been long and the night promises no relief. The story begins in the marshland at Lerna, where the ground breathes and the water stinks of rot. Reeds rattle in small winds. Pools reflect a grey sky that refuses to open. Here the hydra makes its den. It coils in the shadows under a bank where roots hang like ropes. The second labor of Hercules sends him into this ground. He comes with a club and a sword. His nephew, follows with a torch and a cart. They move as men who know the air will turn against them. The swamp swallows their steps. Frogs fall silent. Even the birds draw back from the smell of old blood. Hercules finds the hydra by listening. He knows the beast does not sleep long. A hiss rolls over the water, then a surge. 9 heads lift like black lies opening. Eyes burn low, teeth show in a wet grin. Hercules stands his ground and strikes. One neck breaks under the club, the head drops into the weeds, the stump spits steam, and then blossoms. 2 new heads rise where one was lost. He learns the lesson fast. He strikes again and again. The marsh fills with the sound of wood on bone. Every blow breeds more mouths. The creature moves with cold patience. It slides across the mud and tests the line. Hercules gives ground to firmer soil. The club booms against skull after skull. The air tastes of iron and sulfur. Iolaus runs the torch along dry brush. He waits for the right moment. Hercules pins a neck with his knee and hacks it through. Is there with fire. He cauterizes the stump. The neck seals with a bitter scream. The heads stop multiplying. The men fall into a rhythm. Cut, burn. Step, breathe. The hydra thrashes and tears up roots. Water slaps the bank. A tail whips through reeds and sends mud into the sky. The work is ugly and steady. Sweat blinds the hero. Smoke claws his throat. He does not stop. The monster yields a little. Then the marsh offers a new voice. Carinos crawls from the black water with a shell like a broken shield. Hera sent it. The goddess has carried a long hatred for Hercules and will take any chance to slow his hands. The crab moves sideways with deliberate calm. It finds the hero's ankle and clamps down. Chitin bites into flesh. Hercules staggers in the mud and drops one guard. The hydra lunges. A jaw closes on his shoulder. The club shudders when it meets a skull. It drags fire across another stump. The stink of burned hydra rolls over the pool. Carinos does not let go. Its legs churn the mud into a paste. It pulls as if it could drag a man under by will alone. Hercules looks down through smoke and blood. He shifts his weight and drives his heel. The shell cracks with a flat report. The second blow ends the movement. The crab folds into the mud and slides back toward the water like a broken pot. Hera watches and refuses to waste the gesture. The crab had done what it could. It had obeyed. It had entered a fight that belonged to beings far larger than itself. That is enough for a place in the sky. The goddess fixes the small shape among the stars, the curve of a shell, the splay of legs, a faint scatter, hard to find, unless you already know where to look. The labor runs to its end. Hercules and Ios work the method to the last head, cut and burn until the necks are black glass. The immortal head is buried under a heavy rock at the road to Argos. The swamp settles into silence again. Steam rises in thin veils and then thins away. Somewhere above the mist, the small figure of Carinos has taken up its watch. The heavens hold the record of the bite on the ankle and the answer that crushed it. The constellation will carry that record through clear nights and over winter fields. The marsh will forget, the sky will not. Cancer rises where the year turns hot. In the old calendars, its stars stood at the gate of summer. Priests watched that part of the sky and wrote a single word beside a day that would return like the tide. Solstice. The sun climbs, then pauses, then begins to fall again. The Greeks gave the pause a body, a crab. It creeps sideways, as if the sky itself must shift its weight before it changes course. The shape is faint, the outline is spare. You have to know what you are looking for. In a firmament crowded with heroes and monsters, Cancer keeps a small room. That is part of its force. The quiet signs often do the hardest work. They hold the hinge. Farmers and sailors learned Cancer by feel as much as by sight. The stars here are not loud. They whisper through haze. Near the heart of the figure hangs a pale cloud. The eye can gather on a clear night. The Greeks called it Prep. The manger. 2 dim stars graze at its edge. A Celis Borealis to the north, as a Celes to the south. The little asses together they feed from the cluster are. If the sky kept its own trough, shepherds said that if the manger blurred when the rest of the night was sharp, rain was coming. Pilots set a watch for it from the stern and counted that blur as a warning to shorten sail. Aratus names the place in verse, like a weather note set to music. Tommy fixes the same light in a catalogue that reads like a ledger. Centuries apart, the signs remain the same. Look for the small cloud. Judge your day. Old stories gathered around those 2 asses, as if the cluster were a hearth. One tale told that gods rode humble mounts to a battle, and their braying turned the will of giants. Another said the little beasts were honored for simple service during a march when the strong were tired and the waterskins ran low. The details change with the teller, the intention does not. The heavens hold a lesson that values plain labor over the noise of glory. 2 dim lights, a shared bowl. Men in ports and men in fields learned to trust a pattern that asked little in return. Be steady, keep company, know where to feed and when to move. Cancer's faintness became part of its mythic biography. Hera set the crab among the signs for obedience rather than success. The stars do not blaze like the eye of the bull or the heart of the scorpion. They hang like a memory spoken under the breath. That suits the scene at Lerna. The creature did not change the battle. It distracted a giant for a breath and was broken underfoot. The goddess placed the trace of that act where no wind could erase it. Greek listeners understood the shade of praise in the tale. Some efforts do not finish a story, they mark it. A grip on an ankle, a bruise that throbs the next day, a token granted by a queen who counts loyalty even when the field belongs to someone else. In the language of the sky, Cancer held the path of the moon. Hellenistic writers called the sign a house of sea line. Night by night, the goddess poured her cold light over that reach of the ecliptic, and gave the crab a second task, to govern the tides of sleep and of shore, to preside over kitchens where steam rose in summer, and mothers laid infants on cool stone to rest, to watch the doorways of houses when heat kept them open until dawn. Later, philosophers spoke of a teaching that said, souls come down to earth through this gate, and return by the road that stands across the circle in Capricorn. The crab and the sea-goat thus became the markers of arrival and descent. One looks inward, one looks away. The pair holds the traffic of breath. Cancer once named the latitude where the sun stood at its highest noon. A traveler who kept to that line walked the edge of maps that seemed to smoke in summer. Greeks and Romans drew it across parchment and called it the tropic, the turning. The word still stands, even though the slow drift of the earth has moved the solstice sun into another share of the sky. The name is an old smell in a shirt that has been washed 100 times. It does not leave. Men once stood in fields when the sun reached a crab and knew that the worst heat was near. They planned work at dawn, they tied vines before noon, they broke bread in shade and waited for the first inch of evening. Artists gave the crab a stony grace that the stars refuse. The pattern in the sky is a sketch. The pattern in mosaic is a full body ready to move. Floors of villas in Sicily show a crab on a bed of blue tesserae, with tiny bubbles stitched around its legs. Coins in island markets press its shell beside a date and a magistrate's name. In painted calendars, the crab sits on the line that marks the longest day. A reaper bends over barley on the same panel. A girl pours water into a jar. A fisherman repairs a net. No one points to heroes. Everyone looks at the work that keeps a year alive. The pot sign has no spear. It carries a season. Mariners learned to steer by brighter guides, but never forgot the crab. Gemini guided them out of winter. Leo would carry them into harvest. Cancer was the pause in between. A week of calms could maroon a hull in the mid-sea like a fly in amber. Crews learned patience there. OS out, sails slack, the sky a white bowl by day, and a glass lid by night. The crab kept them company through that long-held breath. 2 dim asses, a faint manger, a story that said the small can be faithful through hours, that leave no trace in sagas. A captain who had buried friends took comfort in that. He did not need omens that roared. He needed a map that respected endurance. So the Greeks read Cancer as the section of the Zodiac that does its work without applause. It straps the season to the year. It marks a limit the sun cannot cross. It teaches by example rather than by threat. Where Gemini shows a vow, shouted into the face of death, and Leo will roar of strength, given shape. The crab makes room for all that with a sideways shuffle and a steady grip. Part of the year is a fight, part is a harvest, part is a weight. Cancer remembers the weight and gives it a sign. Leo begins in the rough hills west of Mycenae, where the earth is thin and the wind cuts low through scrub. Vineyards hold to the slopes like handwriting that refuses to fade. Goat bells carry in the afternoon. Travelers keep to the road and measure distance by dry stream beds and old olive trees. In that country, a single roar could empty a field and close a door. The Nemean lion had come down from its ravine and taken the habit of killing at the edge of daylight. It dragged oxen from yokes. It broke doors with a casual shove of one forepaw. It left tracks that looked like bowls pressed into dust. Stories of it moved faster than carts. People spoke in the way of those who have learned to ration. Fear. Small sentences traded at wells and market stalls. It lives in a cave with 2 mouths. It cannot be cut. It takes spears as thorns. It will not leave a body whole. Eurystheus heard these reports in his hall at Tyrn and felt them as a problem that could earn him the credit of a solution without requiring his own hands. Hercules had returned from exile with strength that disturbed the balance of things. The king set the first labor with a tone of official calm. Go to Neha, find the animal, remove it from the earth. There was no speech about honor or the glory of the house. There was only a line of instruction and the weight of a seal pressed into wax. Hercules accepted the task. As a man accepts a debt he cannot refuse. He took a bow and a quiver. He took a club cut from wild olive. He walked out of the gate before sunrise and did not look back at the walls. He entered near by the road that runs past Cleone. Shepherds watched from distance and made the sign that sends a blessing after a dangerous traveler. The country smelled of crushed thyme and dust. He found a first carcass by flies. A cow torn where the neck meets the shoulder. No bite marks at bone. The hide peeled back as easily as a blanket. He knew from the work of the beast that it did not feed from hunger alone. It practiced its strength on living things to learn the feeling of resistance. He knelt and ran one hand over the dead animal, as if to apologize for using it as a lesson. Then he rose and studied the ground. The tracks were a rhythm of weight and ease. Deep impressions followed by stretches where claw marks hardly touched the surface. The cat knew how to move without a sound. Arrows serve men in most wild places. They came useless here. Hercules met the lion on a shelf of rock where the road narrows and the scrub breaks. The beast stepped into view with the same calm that had entered farmhouse. Odds, it was larger than the tellers had measured. The man was heavy and clean. A bronze wave that caught the sun and threw it back. The eyes did not burn. They watched as a craftsman watches a tool. Hercules took his stance and set the first shaft. The bow bent, the string spoke. The arrow struck the shoulder and bounced as if it had struck a wall of hammered metal. A second shaft went to the ribs. The same refusal, a third at the throat where flesh runs thin. The shaft shattered into drift. The animal blinked once and rolled a slow step forward. A decision made itself. Distance offered no leverage. Hercules dropped the bow and tested the club against his palm. The olive wood had a little spring in it, and the weight pleased him. Yet he understood the terms before he swung. Bone and hide, and the god-born toughness of the creature would not yield to a blow alone. He drove the lion back from the shelf into broken ground, where thorn and rock made a close ring. The beast changed its rhythm and moved with a low glide that sent dust up in veils. It feinted once toward the right and then went straight in. The club met its skull with a sound like a door slammed against stone. The lion spun and struck with a forepaw that blurred in the air. The blow did not cut. It lifted Hercules from his feet and threw him into brush that tore at his arms as he rose. The animal did not press. It watched as if confirming the measure of the man who had come to end it. The cave lay a short climb away, a pocket in limestone with two mouths set at an angle to each other, so that anything cornered at one exit could slip out the other. This place had taught the beast patience. It could take a wound and step into darkness, and wait while men argued with fear at the entrance. Hercules studied the mouths as a hunter studies a set of doors. He cut saplings and dragged stones and built a barricade at O, knee opening until a man would have needed a friend to clear it. He left a narrow gap at the other so that a body could pass only sideways. The work was slow. The sun shifted. Sweat salted his eyes. The silence of the valley deepened in the hour before dusk, when insects rest and birds hold still. He felt the animal watching from somewhere he could not yet see. It came at last, with no roar at all. It slipped through the gap like water and hung for an instant between rock and light. Hercules stepped into it. The club could not serve. The space was too tight. He dropped the wood and reached for the mane. With both hands, the hair felt like ropes soaked in oil. The heat of the body was a furnace held in skin. The animal turned and struck for the throat. He caught the jaw in his forearm and felt teeth that would have cut bronze grind against the muscle. He shifted his weight and drove a knee under the ribs to crush at breath. The cave took the sound of the struggle and returned it as a low drum. Dust rose and fell. Pebbles crawled in small avalanches. He tightened his hold with a patience he had learned in other battles that had left no songs. Strength did the work, and then kept doing it for the span of minutes that felt like a season. The forepaws clawed at his back and made furrows that burned. The jaw slackened. The heat ran out of the great body the way water runs from a cracked jar. He stayed with the weight until his own breath steadied. Then he let it down and stood over it in the half-dark. There was the matter of the hide. The stories that reached tyrants had kept the detail that makes the whole thing clear. No blade would open that skin. Men from the valley had tried to take a trophy from ribs and shoulders and had broken knives without lifting a single curl. Hercules tried his edge out of respect for the craft that had made it and felt the metal skate. He considered ire. He considered stone. He remembered the simplest truth. A thing made beyond the simplest truth. A thing made beyond the ordinary might answer only to itself. He knelt again and took one of the lion's own claws and worked it along a seam where the belly hangs soft. The skin parted with a low sound, a surrender that belongs to the moment when an impossible tool meets its proper use. He stripped the hide with the practice of a man who had dressed animals since boyhood, and did it with care, avoiding cuts that would weaken the pelt. He put the skin on his shoulders and felt the weight settle like a mantle that would never belong to any other man. The jaw came forward over his brow. The fangs framed his face so that anyone who looked would first meet the memory of the animal that had owned the hills. The smell of the cave and of the beast wrapped him. It would take days to fade. He took up the club and stepped out into evening. The sky over Neha had gone the color of grapeskins crushed in the press. A few birds moved low, as if the weight that had pressed them down had lifted. People came out from behind walls in twos and threes, measuring the figure that wore the lion's head and moved with a tired steadiness that spoke the truth better than any shout. There were no speeches in the road. There were nods and the kind of thanks that a country pays with bread and water, and a place to sleep under a roof that does not leak. The return to Tyran rewrote the air of the court. The herald who carried messages for Eurystheus met Hercules at the outer field and would not come closer than a safe span of paces. The king heard the news and walked to the threshold, then took a step back into shade as the figure with the lion's mask grew larger in the courtyard. It is said that Eurystheus looked once and then turned and moved fast into a storage jar that had held grain in other seasons, the way a boy might hide when Hunter walks across the house. He issued the next command from that dark mouth and sent word that future reports must be delivered outside the walls with no trophies brought near. Heracles listened without any visible reaction. He had work to do and would do it, and he knew more than most that fear, born in a man's own house, is an argument without an answer. The hills of Neha did not return to innocence. Hunters found the cave and spoke as if it held a presence, even when empty. Children dared each other to touch the stones of the blocked mouth, and then ran laughing and sick with pride. Vines crept back over the ground where the lion had dragged cattle. The quiet of that country changed its tone. It lost the tremor that comes when people listen for a single sound and gained the deeper breath that comes when a danger has been removed by hands that have taken scars for their payment. In the paintings that followed, the lion would never stand alone again. It would live as the cloak of a single man, a second skin that marked him in every port and on every road, a proof that some tasks remade the one who performed them as completely as a river remakes a bank in flood. Leo claims the warm nights after the year tips past the height of the Sunday. The west still holds a band of copper at dusk. Crickets take the fields. Then a hook of stars lifts from the horizon, like a bright question drawn by a careful hand. The old watchers called that hook the sickle. It marks the head and mane. Farther back, the body gathers in a long run of light. At the heart sits a single royal flame. Later, ages called it Regulus. Greeks also said Cor Leonis, the heart of the lion. Priests stood on rooftops and waited for that star to step clear of the haze. They made their notes on wax tablets. They counted days to harvest. They set dates for rites that asked the gods to steady the season and forgive the roughness of heat. Farmers read Leo with the same attention they gave to soil. The vine leaves grew stiff in the noon glare. The fig trees bled white when cut. The land wanted measured work and early rest. When the sickle stood high after midnight, presses were swept and jars set out in courtyards. The great must would soon run. Shepherds pushed flocks to higher ground where the breath of night still moved. In towns the air tasted of dust and olives. Lions lay in marble and limestone at the mouths of gates. Their stone eyes looked down on carts and sandal feet. A carver's lesson placed a paw upon a globe or a plinth. Rule yourself. Hold the line. Let strength sit still until it is needed. Under those eyes men came and went with baskets and news, and the small griefs that do not stop a day's work. Astronomers fixed Leo among the Zodiac with a craftsman's pride. It walks the ecliptic with the poise of an animal that knows the ground. Ahead lies Cancer with its dim manger. Behind lies Virgo with wheat in her hand. The placement taught a rhythm. Pause at the hinge of the year, then step into labor, then lay claim to the bread that follows. Star by star the figure resolves into meaning. The head bends, the four paws press the unseen earth, the spine runs toward a single cold spark at the tail. Denebula. When the whole rises, the sky seems to carry a living weight. Even those who did not follow names and measures felt that weight, a presence, a standard raised without trumpet. Myth gave the outline a history that men could speak in a courtyard at dusk. Zeus set the lion among the constellations to mark the end of a terror. A cave that had trained a beast to ignore iron. a struggle in close stone where a man refused to yield ground. The trophy in heaven is not a head on a wall. It is an image that teaches. The hide on a hero's shoulders silences a crowd. The shape in the sky steadies a century. When children asked why the lion looks forever ready to move, the answer came in a short chain of facts. It learned to take doors off their hinges. A man learned its patience. He drew it into a place where its tricks would not serve. He did the long work of breath against breath. Then he carried the lesson away and gave it to the year. Temples answered with art that sharpened the thought. Painters set Hercules in a half-light, with the jaw of the lion fallen across his brow. Sculptors cut muscle that speaks without a word. The pelt becomes a mantle that puts an end to boasts. Coins traveled from hand to hand with a lion facing into the wind and a wreath around the legend of a magistrate. Mosaics set lions in tesserae that caught water and wine. The creature watched from bathhouses and banquet halls and the floors of town houses where sunlight walked in from inner courts. A guest paused over the pattern while a servant poured. Strength is in the house. Spend it with care. The message passed without sermon. Sailors who lived by bright markers used Leo to hold their lines on open water. When Regulus cleared the rail at the hour before dawn, a helmsman could confirm his course for Rhodes or for the heel of Italy. When the sickle leaned to the west at the end of night, men judged how much dark remained for rowing and when to call relief. The lion did not shout in storms. It simply stood where it should stand and gave the mariner a fixed point when the mind begins to wander and fear grows teeth. In that steadiness, the brothers of the sea felt a promise that belongs to discipline. Keep the angle, trust the star, let the wave pass. Philosophers took Leo as a study in earned authority. They pointed to Regulus and spoke about the difference between a crown and a head that can bear one. The lion's face in the sky looks outward. It does not plead. It does not threaten. It consents to be a measure. Kings came to shrines with gifts and asked for the dignity that does not tip into rage. Judges wore rings with small lions cut into the bezel and tried to remember that haste shames the bench. Even households listened. Fathers told sons that a heavy hand has to learn when to open. Mothers told daughters that iron in the spirit does not require iron in the tongue. The constellation helped frame those sentences. A picture held the advice in place. Writers of catalogues kept the name so a distant future could still point and know. Hipparchus noted the long slide of the sky and still placed the lion with care among his figures. Ptolemy added magnitudes and a map in numbers. Poets folded that dry precision into lines that brought breath to it again. A lion crouches in the east. His heart burns clear. The year has passed its turning. Bring water, bring shade, bring bread for those who labor before noon. A city that learns such lines grows hard to break. The residents know when to rest. They know when to stand up. They know what a long day demands from the back and from the will. The old festivals of late summer gave Leo a seat at their tables. Men set wreaths of dried bay on Dorintils. Women cooled wine with river stones wrapped in linen. Heralds called the names of athletes into dusty arenas where feet threw up light. In the stands, a father pointed to the sky while his child watched wrestlers lock and lift. See that curve of stars over the roofline? That is the main. The bright one is the heart. Watch how the stronger man waits. See how he will choose the moment and hold. The rules of the contest were a local echo of a larger story. Control the field. Close off the exits. Do the work in the space you have made. As the season wore on, the lion crossed the meridian and began to lean west in the early part of night. The heat still lay heavy on streets and tiles. Cicadas pressed their song into stone. The figure remained high enough to light roofs with its gaze when dinners ended and courtyards cooled. Voices fell, lamps guttered, a last cup went around a table. The stars kept their places as if human hours did not matter. People took comfort in that indifference, a constant above the variable, a frame around change. In that frame, Leo kept teaching by being present, a memory of a cave outside my, a posture of readiness that does not steal forward, a heart that does not flicker. So the Greeks let the lion stand where they needed a law that could be seen. The law said that force must learn to be patient, and then exact. The law said that a city must learn to bar the easy door and steer danger into a place where courage can work in close The law said that a man who has taken a beast by the throat does not have to raise his voice. He can put on the skin and walk home at dusk while the hills hold their breath. Above him, the same outline goes on walking across the months, head lowered, paws firm, eyes on the ground that all must cross. Virgo enters the story on threshing floors, where the first dust of grain hangs like smoke and the husk crackles under wooden sledges. Men walk the circle and sing to keep the rhythm. Women bend at the baskets and lift the clean kernels with quick wrists. Children chase the chaff as it rides a sman. All wind and falls in pale drifts. Along the wall, the village looks secure for an hour. Bread will come, oil will come. The jar in the corner will not echo when you strike it with a knuckle. In that kind of hour, the Greeks placed a figure beside the workers, a young woman who watched without drawing attention. A maiden with the cool steadiness of a well in August. They called her Astray in one voice, and DK in another, daughter of Themis in one telling, child of dawn and star in another, justice in the shape of a person who keeps her hands clean, yet knows the price of order. She holds a single ear of wheat. She looks at the measure in a woman's scoop. She hears the old men argue about a boundary stone and waits to speak until they fall quiet. The world she loved soured slowly. The stories give it stages because people understand steps better than collapse. Golden age with open doors, silver with longer nights, bronze with armor that answered anger too quickly, then the age that Hest mourned, the age that did not bother with pretty names, iron. The change showed first at doorways. Guests were turned away and told to find their own water. Tables had bite marks where hands fought over the last piece of cheese. In courts, the loud one and the tired gave up. Oaths were taken with a casual voice. Fields were cut in the dark. One row too far. A widow's goat went missing and came back slaughtered in another man's pot. The gods watched from their high rooms and withdrew one by one like household gods, packed into chests during a move. Astrea stayed. She stood in porches with a hand on the lintel and told men to put the knife away. She stood by wells and reminded children to wait their turn. She stood at the edge of markets, where weights were ground thin, and asked the seller to place one more fig on the plate. There were days when it worked. The knife went back into the belt. The child stepped aside without tears. The seller nodded and added the fig. Those days held her in place. She walked the roads between towns and slept under vines and watched the same moon the reapers watched from the fields. Then came days when the knife rose anyway, when the child pushed forward and scooped water with both hands until the trough, marked with a stick, went wrong. When the seller laughed and kept the change, she knew the sound of a life bending past repair. It is simple. A voice grows flat. A face fixes in a set that does not reduce. People stopped looking at the witness. They talk over her shoulder as if she were a pillar. She stayed until that sound lived everywhere she turned. Even in rooms where bread had been blessed for 50 years, and everyone knew the names that should not be spoken in anger. The stories say she was the last of the immortals who loved men to walk away. No rush, a steady leaving. A woman who knew how to make an exit that preserves what dignity remains. The walk itself became legend. She chose the dirt road that runs under plane trees. She passed altars with smoke going up in thin columns, and did not pause to fold the ash. She left the pottery districts where clay dust sits forever in the wrinkles of the knuckles. She crossed the long bridges where the river looks like hammered bronze at evening. She turned once in a barley field and watched gleaners pick the corners a second time in silence. She did not speak. She lifted the single ear of wheat and held it at her breast, the way a mother lifts an infant when the crowd grows rough. In that gesture, the Greeks understood her mind. She would carry one proof of what had been good. She would take it where hands could not bruise it. She would leave the rest to men and their hours. The birds lost their nerve and did not follow. Dogs lay in the shade and watched her pass with their heads too. On their paws, night gathered around her in a clean ring. The stories say the air changed weight. Torches seemed rude beside her. The road rose as if it had been a ramp the whole time, and no one had noticed. She did not fly. She did not run. She stepped from hill to hill the way a careful farmer steps across irrigation channels with a brimming bucket. Below, the small lights of farms spread out like a net. At the edges of those lights, men argued about a boundary again, and the same harsh words came out with the same heat. She did not turn back. The sky met her without ceremony. A place opened and held its shape. The maiden stood in that place and did not waver. The ear of wheat shone like a coal in a rayed fire. The Greeks gave it a name that fit the thing itself. Speaker the ear. A single bright witness carried upward to swear that order had once lived on the ground. Down below, the empty space she left filled with other voices. Law kept going because men need it, even when they hate it. Magistrates learned to keep notes because memory grows partisan. Contracts grew longer. Witness lists took a page and a half. Judges sent for extra benches. The habit of weighing returned in tools, since the hand that had weighed by instinct was gone. People missed her most in the moments with no rule book. A fist fight in a lane where neither man remembers the first insult. A widow who cannot pay and must choose between shame and hunger. A small theft that will ruin a boy if punished, and will encourage a group if ignored. The sky carried her image over all of this, like a roof tile that will not crack. Those who looked up saw the steady lamp of Speaker and felt the throat loosen. Some took it as permission to try again in the morning. Some took it as a warning to stop before a sentence went too far. The same pin of light served both. Virgo's stars took their places around that cairn. L, the figure, neither strides nor threatens. She resigns along the ecliptic with her gift across her lap. She leans a little toward the line where the planets walk. The posture is watchful. The Greeks drew it on papyrus and on the wet plaster of dining rooms, where men argued about olives and taxes, and whether a son should be sent to sea. The picture kept them honest more often than it shamed them. It told them that the best guardian of a city is a habit that lives in ordinary hands. Sweep the threshold. Keep the measure fair. Let the voice that has less coin speak first. Put the knife away before you are tired. These are small commandments that ask for no temple and need no priest. A constellation can carry them across harvests and across wars. It asks only that someone point and say the names in order. Maiden, ear of wheat. Speaker, justice. Watching from above, because she could not keep her footing below. Virgo takes her place when the fields are close to giving everything they have. The threshing floors are warm at dusk. The jars stand in rows along courtyard walls. A slow wind carries the scent of straw and figs. Above this work a figure extends along the Zodiac, with that calm the Greeks prized in judges and in seasoned farmers. The maiden does not stride. She reclines on the path of the planets and keeps one bright token where every eye can see it. A single ear of grain. The star that names it burns a steady white. Speaker, men in villages learned its location as they learned a path to water. Women teaching daughters to weigh out flour pointed to the same light and said the word aloud, keep the measure, keep the peace, keep the year. The constellations spoke two languages at once. One was the language of fields. Data's gravity lived here in quiet form. The sheath in the maiden's hand reminded everyone that bread comes first, that a city stands only as long as grain reaches the oven. The month of vintage waited just beyond the lion, and Virgo stood between with the air of someone who knows when to pour and when to hold back. Even the secondary stars hinted at work and timing. Epsilon Virgin carried a name that wandered through many tongues and settled on a meaning that farmers felt in their bones. The grape gatherer. That faint gold pin told vineyards when to watch the sugar creep into skins. The sky offered signals to those who looked up from the press or the trellis and asked the oldest question a household ever asks. Is it time? The second language was the law. Astrology and Dike survived here as presence rather than story, a balance in the eye, a habit in the hand. When markets opened at first light, when weights came out of drawers and were set in pans that rocked on thin arms, the maiden was already above the western roofs and still watching. Merchants eyed the beam and took off a fig, or added one. And in that small correction, a city confessed. It remembered what the image demanded. When magistrates drew up bonds on wax tablets and added the names of witnesses in a tight line, they did so under a sky where the ear of grain held steady. No threat came with that light, no trumpet. It was a quiet instruction that could outlast a dynasty. Keep the contract clean. Speak before anger fills the mouth. Leave enough in the sack for the woman down the street whose son is away with the fleet. Sailors learned Virgo by roots and angles rather than by the smell of cut straw. Spiker rides low in spring evenings and climbs to a royal height when the night is short. Crews tracked it from the shorelines of the Levant to the islands that dot the Aegean and across the open water to Sicily, where the horizon is a hard blue blade by day and a perfect circle by night. When that single star cleared the starboard rail at the middle watch, a hatch, helmsman could fix a course without speaking, and the bow would hold true until dawn lit the sail. The star did more than guide. It trained the mind. To steer by one bright point is to accept that steadiness is a craft, that the hand on the tiller must trust a pattern, the sea cannot change, that the shortest prayer at night is simply a name spoken once into the wind. The old keepers of the sky wrote Virgo into their ledgers with the pride of men who know they are preserving more than numbers. Hipparchus compared observations from earlier generations and found that the heavens were not fixed in the way everyone had believed. The equinox had shifted against the stars. Speaker helped teach that lesson. It is a detail for astronomers, and yet it sits easily in the larger truth that the Greeks kept gathering under these figures. The world moves. The measure must move with it. If the point used to mark a season slides, then the wise man adjusts his calendar and his temper. He does not blame the field. He looks again and corrects his hand. Artists return to the same lines for centuries and still found room to say something new. On a wall in a dining room, a painter set the maiden beside a table where two men leaned over accounts. Her gaze fell on the smaller pile of coins. In a mosaic near a bath, the sheath glowed against a deep blue field, each grain marked with a small square of pale stone that caught water and made it shine. On coins struck in busy ports, the star alone appeared above a single ear, the message stripped to a sign, understood from Antioch to Ostia. In every medium, the figure remained composed. Even when sculptors placed scales over her wrist or a palm branch in her hand, the wheat never left her fingers. Food and fairness. The pairing said more about the stability of a state than any speech in a portico. Myths ran parallel to all this practice, like a river. Beside a road, some told of Aragone mourning her father Icarius, the wine-bearer of Dionys, and hanging herself beneath a tree when the men who had killed him would not hear the truth. Her dog found the body. The gods set both in the sky, the girl as Virgo, the dog as a small star near the foot of the greater constellations. The story gave the constellation a grief that farmers already knew by another path. Wine can be a gift and a danger. A city can fail to hear a just claim. The sky remembers the hearing that was refused. The maiden's calm carries that memory into each season without raising her voice. Temples and courts placed images of Virgo, where citizens could see them on ordinary days. The figure became part of the city's furniture in the best sense. People passed under her lamp on their way to take out a loan, to swear an oath, to settle a fence, to ask for mercy for a son who had stolen olives that were not his. The conversations changed when that gaze was in the room. Men chose simpler words. They put their hands flat on the table rather than folding them into fists. The same star above the roof joined these rooms together, street to street, district to district, until the whole city shared a sense that there is a right way to weigh out a measure after harvest, a right way to add a witness name to a bond, a right way to split a field when a brother dies without sons. There were nights when the air cleared back to the shape it takes, only after wind has rinsed it, and Virgo lay across the sky so plainly that even the tired could pick out her line. The ear of grain shone as if a coal had been pulled from the ash and held up. Children counted secondary stars and drew the figure in dust with a finger. Old men named the bright neighbors one by one and felt their chests ease in the naming. The constellation did not promise rain. It did not carry a prophecy about tea, fate of a fleet. It offered something more useful for most lives. A calm standard, a reminder to value the mundane rites that keep a household from drifting and a city from breaking. Sweep the doorway before you open for business. Share water at the well. Keep the weights true when no one is watching. When the maiden finally slid down into the west at the end of her season, the year had already shifted its tasks. The vintage pressed forward, the roads filled with carts and skins, nights lengthened by an inch. In that change there was no drama. There was the sense of a page turning in a book that has been read many times and still asks for careful attention. Virgo had done what her image was placed to do. She had borne witness over the work that feeds and over the words that bind, held the city's temper where it needed to be. and left a single bright grain burning above the roofs as the next labor came on. Libra rises when the heat begins to soften, and the air at dusk carries the smell of presses and wet stone. The vintage runs in courtyards. Donkeys stand with patient ears while skins are lifted and tied. Markets swell with grain measured into sacks and grapes, stacked in shallow baskets. The sun crosses the line that divides light from darkness so cleanly that men on rooftops speak of equal hours and mark the day with a scratch on plaster. The year steadies itself. That is when the scales take their place along the path of the planets. No creature stands there. No weapon gleams. 2 pans hang from a beam. A small device is given the honor of a sign. The sky speaks in plain terms. Measure this season. Balance the account. Give the day and the night the same respect. The Greeks first knew this reach of stars as part of the Scorpion. Old names kept the memory. Zubin el Janoi for the southern one, Zubin Shamali for the northern one. The names that came down through. Later tongues remember claws rather than trays, a hint that the Scorpion once held the whole span. In time, the Romans claimed the group for themselves and gave it a Latin name that matched their habits. Libra, the scales. It suited a people who loved a calendar that bound fieldwork and festivals to exact days, who wrote laws with lines that did not wiggle, who stamped authority into metal and sent it from hand to hand. The constellation became the emblem of balance in a literal sense long before poets made it a figure for fair dealing. Scales hung in stalls on every street where figs and oil were sold. Scales hung painted on the boards of tribunals. Scales shone from the right hands of goddesses in stone. When citizens looked up and saw the twin lights lift together at evening, they saw the tool by which cities keep order reflected back to them from a colder and safer height. The idea was older than both Greeks and Romans. On clay tablets pressed in cities beside the Euphrates, scribes drew a figure that scholars later read as the balance. The sky over Babylon held a sign for weighing. It stood near the point where the sun turned the year into autumn. Temple officials checked measures against bronze standards, while the stars repeated the same instruction above their heads. Keep the pans even. Do not cheat the hungry. The world carried that simple lesson west with merchants and captives and envoys. The scales joined the belt of the Zodiac that watched the sun move month by month. When Roman magistrates sat under awnings and judged a case that began with a short measure of grain, they did their work in a tradition older than their city walls, and the stars that sat over their shoulders were already charged with that history. Astronomers catalogued Libra with a care that makes the old books feel alive when your finger traces the lines. Alpha in the group keeps the south. Pan, a loose double to the eye on steady nights. Beta glows higher and was once said by observers to carry a faint green cast, a claim repeated enough to become an heirloom, even when later instruments found no color there. Other points close the shape and mark the beam. The figure is sparse. It never draws a crowd the way the lion or the archer does. It rewards patience, and that is part of its meaning. Men who tended calendars prized Libra because it stood near the place where the sun made the day and the night equal in length during the age when Rome ruled the sea. Procession has carried that balance point into another patch of sky since then. A slow drift that Hipparchus measured when he compared old records to his own nights at the eyepiece. Yet the custom of calling autumns, turning the season of the scales, did not fade. People keep names when they help the tongue remember work. Civic life placed Libra in halls and on coins, so the lesson would be close to the fingers. Aquitas held a pair of scales on Roman money beside a cornucopia. Justice stood in courts with the same emblem in a calm that came from the knowledge that she could wait while tempers burned out. Guilds painted the device over door, lintels with the year and the names of 2 officers. Farmers carved it into the end of wooden measures so that borrowings would return cleanly. Children learned to set a small weight on one pan and grain on the other until the beams sat level. In that small game, a city taught itself how to keep faith. The sky reinforced the lesson without voice. Libra rose, Libra crossed the meridian, Libra fell west. Markets closed under its gaze and reopened the next day with fresh chalk marks on the board. Pilots who sailed between islands watched the scales for timing rather than direction. The bright points guided them less than other figures. Yet those points spoke when to make sea, rate and runs, and when to refuse a captain who pressed for a late crossing, The Etesian winds that ruled high summer eased, the breakers changed their note on stony coves. Libra's posture at dusk told a crew what the fishes had already begun to feel in their bones. A last run was safe this week. Another would be foolish. In that way, the constellation governed by restraint and by a practical kind of wisdom. The men who listened kept their ships and their lives. The men who ignored the signal came home under a sail patched in the bow, or did not come home at all. Writers who loved order glanced at Libra when they looked for images to steady the mind. A beam that will stand straight if you take care. Two trays that punish greed without words. The line across the middle that refuses to tilt for a shouted plea. In the art of lawgiving, this image proved stronger than speeches. Theirs and DK appeared with scales because the device said their names in clear strokes. A child could copy. When the city sponsored a festival to renew its promises after harvest, a herald carried a small bronze balance through the procession and then set it on the steps of the temple. People laid coins on one side and loaves on the other until the beam steadied. The act made an easy sermon, give enough until the arm stops its tremor. Then go back to work. The stars themselves carry the old memory of the scorpion even while the sign announces a new idea. Zuban el Ganubi and Zuban Shamali still mean the southern claw and the northern claw in the language that brought those names forward. The night keeps both histories at once, without confusion. That is how cultures often grow. A people inherits a figure as part of the larger beast. Another people redraws the lines and keeps the old names at the corners as labels for a past that remains real. The Greeks placed the scales between the maiden who withdrew and Det, scorpion that brings down the proud hunter. The sequence speaks quietly. First keep the measure, then remember the sting that waits for arrogance. Anyone who traced the zodiac across the sky with a staff could feel those chapters turn. When the sun stepped into Libra, cities marked the date with actions that were small and useful. Weights were tested against standards in public. Official measures were rinsed and blessed with a pinch of salt. Debts were counted and rolled forward, where mercy allowed. Courts cleared old cases before winter closed the roads. Scribes sharpened their reeds and began new ledgers. The scales looked on while people chose balance rather than heat, practice rather than noise. The choice does not produce songs. It produces a year that holds together, and when the night lengthened and the bull of winter stirred on distant hills, the image remained above the roofs. Two quiet pans holding still in the wind. An instrument promoted to the sky so that no one could say they had forgotten what fairness looks like. When Libra stands high at evening, the streets of a Mediterranean town take on a certain pace. The sweet press of grapes slows, presses are rinsed with bucket after bucket, and the first vats settle under linen covers, while a steward tallies, skins and weights with a stylus that squeaks on wax. In that pause, the scales seem to hang over every threshold. A shopkeeper reaches for his beam balance and sets the light brass pans so they do not touch the counter. A boy lays out the standard stones, one by one, each with its stamped mark still visible from the magistrate's office. The first customer points to figs and barley. The arm dips and rises until the crossbar sits level. No one speaks. The beam becomes a small theater of trust. The act repeats from stall to stall and lane to lane. And above those lanes, two stars keep their slow watch, a Ra. Reminder that fairness begins with simple motions performed in public. The constellation carries little ornament, a pair of bright points, a few lesser lights closing the figure, a spare geometry that suits the duty assigned to it. Mariners who knew every boast of Orion and every flashing jewel of the twins spoke of Libra as a quiet tool. When the northern star of the pair lifted clear of haze at dusk, pilots noted the angle of the yard and judged their window for coastwise runs before weather turned. When the southern lights slid down the rail toward morning, they marked a shift in wind and made decisions that saved timber and men. The scales gave no directions across the open sea. They urged timing. Those who understood timing prospered. Those who ignored it learned about patience from broken spars and torn canvas. On carved stones and bronze coins, the balance passed into millions of hands. A quaita stood on Roman denarii with a set of scales and a horn of plenty. A message that law and provision walk together when a state is well governed. In forums across Italy and the provinces, a traveler could put his own small weight on a public ponder and test. A merchant's measure without fear of insult. Greek cities kept their meta in colonnades and marked them with priestly names. So the responsibility was clear. A figure of Theus or DK presided in relief above many of these benches, the two hands resting from her fingers with a calm that steadied tempers. The scene taught more effectively than speeches. Bring your measure into the light. Let the arm decide. Accept the result. Go home with your grain and your temper intact. Astronomers who loved the world for its regularities and its surprises found in Libra a dependable marker for the season. When the sun crossed the line of equal day and night in their age, they wrote down its position with pride, and then in later generations with pride, and then wrote down the difference with the same pride. Hipparchus compared the numbers old men had trusted to the numbers he saw with his own eyes, and understood that the sky's frame slips a little over long years. Precession became a lesson carried in the same pages as star catalogues. The scale still stood for the balance of the year in custom and poetry. Yet observers learned to keep two truths together. The picture holds, the background moves. A patient mind can reconcile both without losing its footing. In the hands of artists, the sign gathered meanings that citizens could recognize at a glance. On friezes, a magistrate raises one tray and lowers the other until they match. On painted panels carried in processions after harvest, a small bronze balance sits before the temple steps, while the crowd piles bread on one pan and coins on the other until the beam steadies in air that smells of must and laurel. In private houses, the emblem appears above doorways where accounts are kept. A father lifts a child to touch the carved beam. So the lesson enters the body before it enters the mind. The gesture becomes habit. The habit becomes a custom that survives bad years and ambitious men. The older memory of claws never vanished. Names preserved it. Zuban Shimali and Zuban el Janubi traveled through tongues and scripts, keeping a hint of the scorpion's reach, even as the figure in the textbooks became a separate instrument. This double history made sense to people who knew that city walls are built from stones taken from older walls. A figure can be cut free and given a new office. The memory of its earlier work remains in the language, a faint echo that keeps the past within earshot. Storytellers in portico shade could point to the arc of autumn and recount both lineages in a single breath. First the creature that seizes, and then the device that weighs, a progression as clear as the store. Turning of a page, courts favored the sign when they wanted tempers to cool. On days when disputes about Dowie's fields and water rights crowded the docket, an usher set a small balance on the magistrate's table before the first case. He raised the beam so it caught light, and then stepped back. Litigants watched the empty pans settle, and for a moment recognized that the room had a center that did not belong to either party. Witnesses stood straighter. Scribes sharpened their reeds. The judge began. Hours later, the same beam still stood, a silent participant in the day's work. Few remembered it on leaving. Yet its presence had acted on the posture of bodies and the choice of words, which is often how order takes hold. When the vineyards finished, Libra remained as a marker for the labors that follow. Depths were counted and renegotiated. Weights and measures were rinsed and sealed for winter. Inventories of oil and grain were copied into new tablets with a fresh hand. Guilds audited their chests in the presence of the device that defined their trade. The master and the youngest apprentice, each placing a stone, the beam returning to center under 4 eyes. Rituals of this sort anchor a city's memory. They translate the image in the sky into actions that knit households to institutions and institutions to seasons. The scales overhead validated the scales on the table. The two sets answered each other like a call, and replies sung across a courtyard. Philosophers found a language in Libra that did not depend on metaphors stretched past their strength. A beam held true when the fulcrum sat square and the arms matched. A polity held true when its laws were legible and its judgments predictable. The best treatises hid in that simple relation. Teachers could stand with a pair of wooden pans before a group of students and let the device explain limits and proportion while essay. Ingle lamp threw the shadow of the beam on the wall. The lesson entered the hands first. Minds followed. As autumn slipped toward early winter, the constellation crossed the meridian at dusk and began its descent toward the western line. Roof tiles cooled, smoke from presses thinned. The long shouting of summer quieted into conversations, carried at a walking pace. The scales did not cease their work when they sank. Their season's habits continued in ledgers and storehouses and in the measured steps of men who had learned to keep the beam level when tired. In that continuity you can feel why the ancients gave an instrument a place beside beasts and heroes. The year depends on fearless strength in some chapters. In others, it depends on steadiness performed without witnesses. Libra taught the second kind and made sure the lesson was visible every time the sun came to the border between light and dark. Scorpio rises from the horizon like something remembered before language. A hooked tail climbs first, then the curve of a body thick with stars. Low in the southern sky, the heart burns red, a steady cold that sailors learned at once, and farmers pointed out to their sons. Antares, rival of Aries, a name that tells you how it looks when the air is clear and the night is warm enough to carry voices across fields. The scorpion takes shape in stages as your eyes adjust. A brow forms around Dishabah, claws stretch toward the west where the year has tipped. The tail bends tight and ends in a sting named Shala, a word that tastes of sand and heat. The figure is one of the few that needs no help from imagination. The desert people knew it, the island people knew it. The Greeks gave it a story fitted to its weight. Orion drew the story to himself with the stubborn gravity of men who do not measure the reach of their words. A giant and a hunter who crossed seas in a single stride. Of rumor, he boasted that he would clear the world of every beast. Some versions say he laid hands on what should never be touched and turned desire into an assault. The island of Chios remembers him for a king's errand that soured when the king delayed the promised bride. Artemis appears in other tellings, sometimes companion, sometimes judge. In one strand, the earth herself, Gaia heard the claim and answered without speech. She sent a scorpion from the ground, a creature that carries its weapon behind it and does not announce its angle until the last step. The meeting reads like a line carved in stone. Orion strides across a flat country at noon. Heat lifts in sheets from the ground. The scorpion comes from a shadow cast by nothing more than a rock. It is small beside him until it is close. Then the weapon matters more than the measure of the bodies. A quick arc, a puncture that looks like an accident and feels like fire under the skin. The giant turns and stamps and fails to find the thing that has already done enough. The poison begins its slow work. In other verses, the creature drives him toward water, and he wades in until the surface closes over his head. Apollo's trick enters at the edges. A brother sets a test for his sister and asks her to shoot at a dark speck in the sea. The arrow lands true. Orion sinks. However, the line is written, the end keeps faith. With the same idea, a man who claimed the right to end all wild lives becomes the example that warns against claims without measure. The gods placed their witnesses where no hand could move them again. Orion received a place among the winter stars. A belt of 3 lights draws the eye, and the sword hangs beneath. Dogs run at his heels. He raises a club into darkness that needs no club. Far away across the river of the sky, the scorpion takes the months he cannot take. One rises as the other flees. The old teachers pointed to that chase as if it could cool a fever. Watch the horizon at dusk in late summer. The scorpion lifts. Orion is gone. Watch again before dawn in winter. Orion stands bright at the zenith. The scorpion has sunk. Their separation is a geometry of warning. Pride draws its answer from the ground. The answer waits patient and strikes when the hour returns. Antares holds the center with a color that feels ancient, even when you are young. Around it, the scorpion wears clusters, like sparks shaken from a forge. The Tommy cluster, M7, spills a pale dust south of the tail. M6, the butterfly lies nearby and opens like a hand. The names came later, but the sight is older than names. On clear nights, a shepherd far from lamps could read the weather in those smudges and feel less alone. Pilots knew the line that runs from the heart to the sting and used it to judge bearings when coasts went dark. The figure guides the body, whether you believe in constellations or only in craft. A curve here, a halt there. The road from Antares to Charlola teaches memory by motion. It is enough to get you home across water. You have crossed 100 times and still respect. Ancient mouths kept both versions of the quarrel. The one where Gaia sends the scorpion because a man threatens the order of living things. the one where Artemis remembers her office and calls up a creature that can end what she will not forget. Apollo's arrow circles the pair like a gull that will not land. The point is not which god carried the message, but that the ground answered. A low instrument, a quiet instrument, an instrument that does not need sound. Rural altars bore small scorpions in relief for that reason. A house in the back country understands the danger of hands that forget themselves. A mother taught a child the shape in the sky and said 2 sentences to last a lifetime. Do not boast again. The world, do not mistake speed for safety. Scorpio owns the deep parts of summer, where sleep grows light and dogs bark at nothing, and the countryside waits for a wind that will not come. In those hours, the red heart hangs over roofs and turns whole towns into listeners. Poets who cared for measure in lines liked the sign for the same reason. Magistrates liked Libra. It explains without ornaments. A body, a weapon, a jewel in which the smaller thing does not wander from its task. The counterstroke moves from ritual into habit. Through such images, men who had grown careless with their strength stood in courtyards and traced the crooked line of the tail with a finger against the sky and felt their voices fall. Boys who counted the stars from a wall stopped at the stinger and counted again to be sure. The constellation did its work by being itself. The calendar folded the lesson into action when the Scorpion rode high. Harvest plans hardened into dates. Heat pushed cities toward evening courts. Roads emptied at noon and filled again at dusk. Vine leaves curled in the glare, and then lifted when the dark brought breath back to the hills. The sign offered no omen for individual fates. It spoke to the whole. Keep to shade in the worst hours. Cut earlier than pride would like. Tie bundles with more care than last year, because the air drinks sweat faster than water can replace it. The same voice carried to soldiers on border posts and to crews in anchorages where the swell never sleeps. The figure told them to shorten the morning watch, to think twice before chasing a quarrel into the open country, to put the weight on prudence until the weather changed. So the Greeks let the Scorpion hold its ground across from the hunter and kept telling the story in full light. The image traveled from vase to wall to coin to the sky above the speaker's head. It has never lost the edge. Pay had made it valuable. A creature drawn with economy. A sting that bends like a question you cannot refuse to answer. A red heart set at the center to remind the strong that the world contains forces that do not care who wears the crown or carries the club. The sign sits on the ecliptic, where the sun walks its yearly road. Though the sun's stay is brief in these stars, ancient observers, who kept strict calendars, gave the Scorpion only a handful of days before the sun crossed into the serpent-bearer. The fact did not diminish the figure's presence. It heightened the sense that this was a gate to be noted with care. The Milky Way flows through the same region, which gives the body of the Scorpion an almost tangible depth on clear nights far from lamps. A child who sees that arc once from a black beach carries the shape forever and will find it again from a mountain ridge or a deck with the rails wet from dew. Scholars of star names liked Scorpio for the way it kept traces of older tongues. The Greeks spoke of Scorpios and wrote it in the lists of the Zodiac. Romans used Scorpius and drew the same body into their mosaics with tesserae, the color of wine and honey. Traders coming west carried Arabic names for the tail and the brow that would live on even when alphabets changed. The habit of inheritance suited the figure, a creature that endures in dry ground and in heat leaves the same impression on minds that travel. Greek and Roman artists carved scorpions on small stones used as seals or amulets. Soldiers wore them on rings struck in iron. Householders set them on oil lamps so that the last light seen before sleep would belong to a shape that warns against careless hands and rash vows. Astrology in the Hellenistic schools placed Mars with the Scorpion and taught that the sign carried power through fixed intensity. Philosophers who were more concerned with conduct than with fate borrowed the image without the rules. They spoke of the Scorpion when they wanted to explain a kind of discipline that waits for the moment that matters and spends its force in a single clean use. The same lesson appears in small practical customs. Reapers who worked under anchores kept a tighter line when binding sheave because the air drank sweat faster than wells could satisfy a throat. Captains shifted watches so the midday sun found fewer men on deck and found those men with water near at hand. Garrison commanders on borders shortened patrol circuits and doubled the hour at the gate. a concession to heat that preserved horses and tempers. Antares has the authority that belongs to a clock hand. Its heliacal rising when the star first returns to the dawn after invisibility in the sun's glare told whole communities that the worst heat was on its way. Wine presses were checked and repaired. Roofs were patched before 2 months of weather tested joints and clay. Jars were counted and chalk marked because miscounting after harvest costs less than miscounting before. The same pin of red taught sailors prudence in late season, ventures across long fetches of sea. An embarkation that made sense in the weeks of the twins could sink a hull in the weeks of the scorpion. Good practice rests in that kind of distinction, and the sky repeats the instruction until it becomes second nature. Artists never tired of fitting the scorpion into useful places. It crawls around the rims of craters that once held watered wine. It decorates the base of sundials, where a small gnome throws a thin blade of shadow across the hours. It crouches on thresholds in mosaic, a sign that tells visitors to watch their tongues and tells residents to keep their own. The body carries no crown. The figure requires no spear. A curved weapon raised behind a patient creature offers enough narrative for a how. Say hold, it says, slow your stride as you enter and measure your strength as you speak. The same sense follows the constellation across the year. The red heart climbs, the tail bends, the lesson arrives without need of a priest. So the Greeks kept Scorpio in its place across from the winter hunter and let Antares burn above their courts, their fields, and their harbors until the season changed. When the first hints of cool entered the air and the cicadas eased their chorus, the stinger drew down toward the line of the sea. Vines let go of their last sweetness, roads filled with carts. The sky moved onto the sign that draws a bow. The scorpion left behind an afterimage in the eyes of anyone who had watched it, night after night. A curve, a call, a rule about claims, and their limits written where no hand could erase it. Sagittarius comes up along the low southern line when the heat has settled into stones and the Milky Way spills across the sky like a pale road. The eye finds a bow first, then an arm that draws the string, then a body that seems half man and half swift creature planted in darkness with the poise of someone who knows where the arrow will land before the release. The arrow points toward the red lamp in the scorpion's breast. The whole scene reads as a single sentence written in light. An archer stands on the bank of the Star River and holds a threat at bay. Storytellers gave the archer a name and a home among living hills. They spoke of Kraus, a hunter who grew up on Mount Helon, under the care of Uem, the nurse of the Muses, and who learned his woodcraft with the quickness of a boy who never feared weather. He kept the slopes quiet while the daughters of memory sang. He judged the stir in brush before he saw it. He invented a way to mark delight that rooms now take for granted. Hands brought together sharply. So the air answers back. The Muses called. It prays, Kraus called it, thanks. When he ran with the hounds, he loosed arrows that struck where thought had told them to go. When he sat at the edge of the spring below the mountain and listened to hymns, he kept an eye on the treen and counted how many heartbeats would be needed to stand, knock, draw, and change the mind of any shape that wandered too close. The Muses asked Zeus to honor a guardian who understood psalm and danger in the same breath. The god answered by fixing Kraus in the sky with a bow forever drawn, hooves or shaggy legs given by artists to show speed. A tale sometimes sketched with a rustic flourish that remembers his woodland blood. Other mouths told of Chiron, the patient teacher of heroes, and let his virtues bleed into the archer's outline, even as his own constellation stands farther south. They remembered a wound that never closed, a poisoned arrow loosed by Hercules that lodged a lesson deeper than any he had taught with words, and the strange bargain that followed, when the Immortal chose to yield his endless days so Prometheus could be freed. Wisdom, skill, and a justice learned in pain are hard qualities to keep contained in one figure only. Observers who loved clean meanings allowed the archer of the Zodiac to carry out character. An arrow drawn against the dark can serve as a sign for the kind of knowledge that acts without noise. The Greeks read the archer's posture against the creature behind him and found comfort in the geometry. The line from the knock through the shaft passes toward Antares, a reminder that courage sometimes lives in the silent moment before release. Ancient star writers traced the bow with names that sailed into later ages. Caus Borealis at the upper limb, Cors Media across the bend, Causalis along the lower stave, The arrowhead glints at Al-Nisl, the arrow, and the hand finds the grip by knee. A bright mark, whose E-sound came down through trader's roots. A seller sits at the arm like a small shoulder flash. Priest astronomers copied these points into lists, and then compared the lists to the sky until the pattern held steady in memory. Pilots in warm harbors needed the body less than they needed the bow. The arc itself became an instruction, a curve one could set against the sea to keep bearings while running along summer coasts. The archer stands where the Star River is thickest. On clear nights, a shepherd lying back on warm ground near a field wall can see darkness gouged with brightness there. Small patches like breath on glass, set among countless sparks. Those who watched long said the sky looked deepest in that quarter and kept an old reverence for the place. The ecliptic runs through the same region. Planets step past the archer's arm in slow procession, evening after evening, like travelers asking leave to cross a guarded bridge. Calendars noted his season with tasks that suit long days and short tempers. Move stores before thunder breaks. Check rigging before a launch. Set water where workers can reach it without asking. The myth gave the practical a face. A figure on the margin of the Star River promises defense, while others do their work. Artists put the archer into every material people touch. He runs along black figure vases with a bow that looks like a crescent caught in flight. He is cut into inaglios no wider than a thumb, a poised miniature carried in rings. He strides in mosaic over the floors of Bethusius, tiles shaping muscles and a taut string and lines a child could follow with a damp finger. In all these rooms the same lesson waits. Preparation lives in small motions. A hand cups the knock, a second hand draws. Eyes find the mark and refuse to wander. The arrow does not tremble because the arm has practiced too often to let it shake. When the archer clears the eastern roofs in the hours after sunset, the summer night has reached the stretch when crickets keep their chorus and the town grows still. Men lean on parapets and count the main lights without speaking. Women on upper balconies lift washed cloths to lines and pause to look south. A boy on a flat roof learns to match star to star by watching the shaft climb and the scorpion sink. And in the exercise, his patience holds a little longer than it did last week. The figure teaches without voice. It invites the quiet that turns skill into instinct. The Greeks, who loved stories and also loved order, left the archer there to keep that invitation open for any pair of eyes willing to wait until the bow becomes visible in full, and the arrow finally points with certainty into the dark. Sagittarius governs the weeks, when the Milky Way looks like smoke carried low along the horizon. The air stays warm after dusk. The grass keeps the day's heat and releases it slowly, as if the ground were breathing. People look south and find the bow again. The shape grows obvious as the eye adjusts. Cos Borealis holds the upper limb. Cos Media bends the middle. Causalis secures the lower stave. Al-Nisl glints where an arrowhead would flash if the archer loosed. None steadies the hand. A seller marks the arm like a small badge. Farther off, Rukbat sits by the knee with a cool steadiness that scribes always enjoyed writing down, even when brighter fires drew more attention. On practical nights, a pilot traces a smaller figure inside the larger one. A pot with a spout and a handle picked from these same stars, a compact asterism that later ages learn to call the teapot. The Milky Way rises from that spout like steam. Children see it at once and remember where to look for the rest of their lives. Calendar keepers put tasks under this sign that require long patience and a clear head. The dog days have passed, their peak. Thunder still threatens hills at sunset. Roads hold dust that tastes of lime and crushed grass. Storehouses need checking before carts begin to roll in earnest. Rope must be mended and coiled close to hand. Water placed where men will reach for it without breaking pace. The bow in the south becomes a rule for the mind. Prepare before movement starts. Hold the draw without shaking. Choose the instant that changes outcomes. The myth gives this rule a guardian who understands music and risk in the same breath. Christ kept Helicon quiet so songs could be heard. He listened while he watched the Trian. He invented a clean way to praise. Hands struck together so the air replied. The muses asked Zeus to keep such a listener in the world forever. The answer stands each summer along the Star River with the string drawn and the arrow held. Scholars who loved clean attributions pointed to Kraus when they wanted a man at the center of the sign. Others felt Chiron's gravity and let it shape the character of the figure, even while they kept his own constellation separate. Chiron taught heroes to ride, to hunt, to sew wounds, to draw a bow without haste. He carried a hurt he could not mend and traded immortality to end it. Wisdom that accepts cost belongs anywhere. Courage is expected to last. The archer over the southern roofs acquires that weight. Artists understood this and gave the body that holds the bow a human chest and a beast's engine, hooves in some hands, a long goat tail in others, a hybrid that shows speed married to judgment. The exact anatomy shifted by region and workshop. The intent held, a figure made to move and to aim at once. Sailors used Sagittarius for bearings, as the season pulled them along familiar coasts. The arrow points toward the red lamp in the breast of the Scorpion and makes a straight line that keeps a helm honest on. Warm nights, ports under islands glowed like small fires beyond headlands. Crews watched the bow clear the yard and knew how much dark remained for rowing. The Star River behind the archer gave confidence on cloudless passages. Where the brightness thickens, the eye learns to trust a route across sky, the way a hunter learns a path across scrub. Pilots who had passed their prime taught the young to read the bow and the archer's body in parts. And then, as a whole point out, Causalicis find Al-Nil walk your finger along the shaft to keep that line in your head when land sinks. After moonset priest astronomers wrote the figure with pleasure into their catalogues, they love the way the ecliptic climbs through this quarter, while the Milky Way pours through it at a separate angle. Planets pass the stretch at bow, like petitioners crossing a guarded bridge. Mars looks fierce here. Jupiter glows with an authority that belongs to his size and to the stories that carry his name. Venus steals attention when she strays into the same field. The watchers copied positions with reeds and ink until the paper became a dark garden of points and numbers. But Hippicus compared the gardens of earlier men to the sky above his head and saw that the frame itself shifts over centuries. He kept both truths without flinching. The pattern remains useful. The background moves. In towns that cared for memory, the archer marched through images that ordinary people touched every day. He strides across the black curve of craters with a bow drawn tight and the string picked out in a pale stroke. He lives on signet stones no larger than a thumb, a poised miniature pressed into wax to seal accounts and letters. He runs over bathhouse floors in tesserae that shine after a bucket has passed, the wet tiles making his limbs look alive. Carvers set him on public altars beside the summer months of the year. Painters placed him on dining room walls opposite shelves where cups stood ready for wine, a reminder that chaos still walks and that someone must keep watch at the edge of the feast. The season under this sign trains temper as much as muscle. Heat has pared speech down to what is necessary. Work gets done because men pace themselves. The bow teaches the same economy. Lift, anchor, draw through the back. Let the shoulders carry the weight so the hand can remain calm. Do it again after a drink of water. The sky turning above a field of stubble makes these motions feel older than any one body. A boy learns to pull a short bow behind a sheepfold at dusk and hears crickets as he concentrates on keeping his elbow high. A veteran who has set down weapons for years looks south from a roof and feels his shoulder blades remember the line of a good shot. Neither speaks. The figure holds their attention until the arrowhead brightens and the scorpion's tail sinks another finger toward the west. Late at night, the archer stands over the thickest dark clouds anyone can see without an instrument. The darkness between those clouds reaches into a depth that unsettles even steady hearts. Philosophers like to let their voices trail off there. The world beyond the world showed itself in a form that demanded humility. The bow, aimed into that region, gives mortals something to do with their attention. It lends purpose to a view that otherwise swallows thought. You can count the stars along the shaft and feel small without feeling lost. You can place the arrowhead and trust that it will be there when you look again next year. A pattern whose parts have names steadies a mind when summer has run long and fatigue makes edges blur. When the archer begins his slide toward the west, a city has already changed its rhythm. Presses run by torchlight. Teams load carts before sunrise. Householders check shutters against sudden winds. In ports, ropes thicken over bolts, as if harbors gather their own muscles for weather to come. Sagittarius remains above the southern roofline while these motions repeat. The sign carries no crown. It offers a craft. Across fields, across water, across rooms, with low lamps, people read the same lesson in the same posture. Preparation in quiet, attention held, release when the mark is sure. Capricorn rises when the year thins and the fields give off the dry smell of stalks, left standing for birds. Evening brings a clear cold that sharpens sound. Roof tiles click as they settle. From the south, a wedge of faint stars climbs in a shape old keepers of the sky drew as a broken triangle, the forepart like a squared jaw and the hind part falling away toward water. Sailors learned the outline by habit. Farmers learned it by season. Temple calendars fixed great days to its ascent. The sun reached its lowest noon in these stars for generations of Greek and Roman time, a turning so steady that geographers named a whole band of Earth after the creature. The Tropic of Capricorn runs across maps like a stitched scar, a reminder that the solstice once stood there and that men keep a name even when the heavens shift by slow degrees. The goat that enters the river kept watch over this pause in light and over the work that winter demands. Count the jars again. Seal the lids, mend the net, write the tally with a careful hand before the new year empties it with fresh need. Story circles to a day when the order of heaven failed. Typhon rose from the earth like a mountain torn loose and given legs. The monster carried a forest of snakes for hair and a voice that broke stone. When he climbed the skyline, gods who had ruled by effortless gestures felt their hands go light. Olympus emptied in a rush to save their lives and scatter their tracks. The immortals changed their forms as they ran. A swan beat its wings over reeds. An ibis lifted its long bill from the mud. A cow kicked down the riverbank. Pan, whose hooves had wrung laughter from the hills of Arcadia, reached the water's edge with the pressure of the monster's breath in his back. He plunged forward, and in the plunge his body learned a new shape that answered the need of the hour. From the waist up he kept his goat strength, the horned head, the shag of the neck, the shag of the neck, the chest built for a shout. From the waist down he learned the river's craft. A tail scaled and quick, a swimmer's engine, a line through the current that left no wake. In that single movement he became the creature the sky would remember forever. A goat sawn to a fish, a guardian fit for banks and eddies, where danger hunts. While the gods hid, Zeus fought and lost ground. Typhon struck him down on a ridge and tore the sinews from his hands and legs, a violence that made the king of the sky as weak as a child dropped from a cart. The monster hid those tendons in a cave on Cilician shores and set a guard with the head full of serpents. The story in this part turns on a small figure who refuses to be counted out of the main work. Agippan Goatpan moved through reeds and over shores with a thief's quiet and found the cavern by the smell of salt and snakes. Hermes, who knew every trick and every door that opens when a password is spoken softly enough, joined him. Between them, they brought the guarded packet out into daylight, quick as a kingfisher's strike. Zeus fitted the sinus back into wrist and heel, and rose with a voice that sent Typhon into a long flight toward Etna. Lightning finished what cunning began. In the peace that followed, Zeus set the goatfish among the stars to honor a courage. No banquet song was meant to catch a rescue made by water sense and by a body that had learned without complaint to wear two elements at once. Older memories cling to the same outline. The figure on Babylonian tablets is Suhur-Mashu, the goatfish pressed into clay in the age when scribes wrote the year as a braid of seasons and the sky as a round tablet with wedges for signs. Traders carried that beast west with their weights and their god names, and the Greeks gave the old image fresh work in a crisis they could recite at the hearth. The Romans then let the sea-goat keep his place at the hinge of winter and peopled the month with rites to Saturn, god of sowing and stored grain, green boughs in the forum, and open hands at the tables of the poor. In houses hung with ivy, children learned to point out the low wedge of Capricorn and say the word that binds story to season. Turning men of figures recorded the solstice against the same group even after Hipparchus proved that the equinoxes and solstices creep along the ecliptic through the centuries. Names held because names carry habits. Habits held because they keep granaries from lying and ships from leaving in a foolish wind. The sea-goats stop, Ries, have a spare grammar that trained eyes enjoy. At the tail shines dengue, the tail of the goat, a steady white that marks the hind edge where the imagined body sinks into dark. Near the head stands algae, a double to the naked eye on very clear nights. 2 points grazing close, like a pair of horns set side by side. Along the upper line glows Dabi, the butcher, a name that wanders through tongues and suits a season when households cull herds for winter meat. Nashira hangs on the back with a quiet light. Later lists call it the bringer of good news, a sound borrowed from trader speech that pleases listeners even when scholars shake their heads at the exact path of the word. The figure is faint. It rewards patience. Children learn it by first finding the bright water bird to the west and the square with wings above, then slipping down to the goat whose hindquarters are already in the river. Once seen, it becomes a companion of long nights, a modest sign that does the work of marking hours without demanding a crowd. Another thread binds the goat to a story of care given in secret. When Zeus was a hidden infant on Crete, a goat called Amalthea fed him with her milk, while the curates beat their shields to drown his cries. One day he grabbed at her horn in play and snapped it. The gods set a charm on the broken thing and made it the cornucopia, a horn that pours grain, apples, and wine without end. Greek images place that horn in many hands, tiki in cities, data in fields. Yet the memory of the goat remains in the shape of the constellation that rules the stores at year's end. The line from the cave on Ida to the wedge of winter sky is short once you see it. Care breeds abundance. Abundance needs guarding. A creature that can graze a cliff in summer and swim a flood in autumn is a fitting emblem for that duty. Capricorn's place along the sun's road gave it a governance, beyond a single tale. When the sun entered the goat, households took stock and crowned a few days with license and gifts during Saturn's feast. Then the plain work resumed. Oils were counted, ledgers closed and opened. Nets were laid out of the wind to dry, their knots stiff with salt. Shepherds checked low stone walls for gaps before lambing. In harbors, skippers looked south, where the sea-goat kept his steady station, and measured 2 things at once: the time of year and the mind they would need to cross it. The sign speaks in a tone people trust when years run lean. Endure, prepare, change shape when the river leaves its banks. Hold to the rock when it falls again within its bed. So the Greeks let the sea-goat keep the low corner of the sky, where water meets earth and where the year decides to turn. The figure carries no spear. It carries a lesson about survival that travels well from clay ledger to temple frieze to a pilot's night watch. A goat that learned to swim brought Zeus back to the hand that throws thunder. The image preserves that fact without embroidery. On rooftops stamped with frost or in courtyards washed after a storm, eyes find the spare triangle and the faint tail star, and remember how rescue can come from a quick mind and a body willing to learn a second element when the first one fails. Capricorn rules the hours when breath shows in doorways and the first frost bites the edge of a system. The sign rises in a clean sky that makes small sounds travel. A cart axle speaks all the way down a lane. A dog shakes once, and the collar rings like metal. This is the portion of the year that people mark with instruments as well as with stories. A priest stands beside a gnome at noon. The shadow stretches to its longest point on the paving. Chalk fixes the reach with a straight line. Tomorrow the mark will be shorter by a finger. The turn has begun. Calend. Hours kept in temple rooms take a fresh column. Account boards in houses take a new tally. Men check jars in cool rooms and count again. Oil, grain, salted meat, wine left to carry a month. The sun sits low at noon. The day releases light carefully. The night gathers it again with open hands. The sky helps the hand that measures. Near the goat there is a small cluster that looks like breath on glass. In very dark air, it is easy to mistake for a blurred star. It is a ball of ancient suns bound like bees on a branch. Later books call it Mysia 30. Shepherds learn it by feel before they know its catalogue name. When the night is sharp and dry, the cluster shows a bright core. When haze lies low, it dissolves. The difference tells a watcher more about weather than any boast. Many of the goat's points please the eye of a reader who loves doubles. The foremost horn is 2 stars set in a wide pair. The butcher star near the back has companions as well. The tail light is steady on most nights, and then without warning fades by a small step when a dark body moves across it. A quiet eclipse that repeats through a cycle most men will never count. These are details for those who sit long with the cold. They are also a grammar that steadies a mind in months when fields lie bare, and work uses patience more than strength. City life folds the same steadiness into custom. The Romans kept a week of festal ease as the sun reached its low place. Saturnalia doors open, masters exchange seats with servants, dice rattle in public. Cooks carry platters through streets stacked with loaves and pork and greens. Children shout a single greeting at strangers and are answered with a gift. The old cry carries through courtyards and markets. Io Saturnalia. Laurel hangs over lentils with colored wool. Lamps burn longer than wisdom approves, and still the stores do not empty, because thought has been put into storage for months. When the week ends, the city cleans altars and sweeps floors. Weights come back out of cupboards. The scales go on counters. Measures are tested near the forum bench. The year does not repair itself by magic. It repairs because habit survived pleasure. Capricorn holds the corner while this happens. The goat has taken the river. The tail keeps the current. The four quarters hold the bank. Power borrows its signs from the sky. Augustus chose the goat for a badge on coins and standards. His astrologers looked at charts and found the creature rising at an important hour in his making. The emblem went abroad in silver and bronze. A small sea-goat swam over the heads of soldiers and through markets where hands changed money for grain and oil. The message was simple: a ruler who knows when years turn, a ruler who can cross two elements, a ruler who watches stores and keeps the river from taking the field. The image reached where speeches could not go. It taught in pockets and on the palms of the poor. Centuries pass, and the coins outlast the men who spent them. The goat still looks up from a grave of dirt in excavations and says the same sentence in a voice of metal. The star figure stands low and faint. Sailors value such modest signs because they signal time more than direction. When the goat clears the line of the sea in the first hour of evening, wise skippers shorten their plan. Long open crossings sleep until spring. Crews throw extra lashings over cargo and check all thongs twice before dark. The Etruscan winds have given up the field. Now come blows from quarter and calm days that trap a hull among swells. Pilots learn routes that creep along shore and add harbors to the map of a week. In that craft, the sea-goat becomes the friendship's keep for years. A small wedge over the rail, a message that says, wait or move in short steps. A lamp at the gauge of caution. Houses inland read the same message in other work. Shepherds bring use to sheltered folds and mend low walls where a fox could press. Vintners drain drags from the last jars and leave them inverted until the smell of sour is gone. Potters lay their wheels flat and clean the rins with a strip of wet cloth. Scribes close ledgers for the year and begin new ones with careful strokes. It is in these rooms that the old story about broken horns and giving hands holds its place. Amalthea raised a hidden child. The horn she lost became a horn that pours. People keep that shape near cupboards as a promise that thought and care will bring another year to the table. The goat in the sky and the horn on the shelf speak the same language from different heights. Capricorn stands between the water-bearer and the fishes. Winter moves under these three signs like a river through cut stone. The goat enters the stream first because he knows the bank and knows the current. The one who follows carries water across land and sky without spilling. The last swims below the surface with a cord that keeps two lives together. The order matters. First the turn, then the carrying, then the crossing. Greek eyes learned those chapters as children learned the turns of a well-worn path near home. The sky was an atlas and a manual. It was also a memory palace. Hands that had pressed the solstice shadow into chalk returned to the same roof at dawn weeks later and saw the next figure rising with a jar at his knee. Philosophers had no trouble finding a lesson under the sea-goat. They preferred clean rules tested against ordinary life. The figure offered several. Change shape when you must, in order to preserve what matters. Rescue can be quiet and still earn the place of honor. Storage is a virtue when it keeps hunger away from the house. Strength survives winter when it accepts limits. In poor, Ticos lined with cold columns. Teachers set out such points on tablets and then let their students breathe steam and think. The sky above them gave consent, no thunder, no omen, only a modest wedge of stars lifting, and a night that asked for fewer words and more endurance. When the days begin to open by minutes, you can feel the sign season loosening its grip. Frost holds only in shadow. Air moves through streets again. Dogs sleep in the sun, against walls that face east. The goat slides toward the west in the early part of night, and steadies the thought that drove the month. The turning has held, the stores have lasted. The river is still in its banks, the next shape waits with a vessel ready. The year is a craft, learned in sections. Capricorn keeps one of the hard sections and dignifies it. A small set of stars does that work in a sky crowded with brighter figures. It is enough. Aquarius begins on a slope of Mount Ida, where the grass stays soft, even in late summer, and a boy watches sheep with the patience of someone who hears more than he says. The boy is Ganymede, son of Tro, the founder of Troy, a child whose beauty moves through the countryside, like a rumor that does not fade with distance. He walks barefoot along the ridge and carries a staff cut that morning from a young ash. Dogs lope at his heels and stop when he stops, as if they understand that their master can read the wind by listening to the flight of a bee. The sky is a blue that seems to promise mercy. He looks up with the unguarded gaze of someone who has not yet learned that the gods prefer surprise. Zeus sees him from a height that makes kingdoms look like coins. Desire does what it always does in these stories. It rewrites the rules in a stroke and expects the world to keep up. The king of the sky chooses a shape that will not alarm a shepherd until it is too late. He becomes an eagle that can dive without a sound. The hawks over Ida know this bird and give way when its shadow cuts the slope. The air smells of thyme and sheep. Ganymede squints into the sun because the light seems to fold and then darken as if a cloud had arrived without warning. Wings gather the boy from the ground with a grip under the arms that lifts and does not let go. Staff and sandals fall into the grass. Dogs rear and bark and then grow small as the world pulls away beneath him. The flight is a long thought spoken slowly. The boy does not cry out. He stares at the feathers as if the mind can understand pain by counting the small things that carry it. Fields turn into a patchwork. Rivers turn into threads. The sea lifts like a metal plate, held at a tilt. Ganymede feels what every mortal feels, when the distance between earth and sky changes with a speed that makes the stomach argue with the head. Fear and awe take turns in the space behind his ribs. He has time to notice the strength in the bird's neck and the steady beat of the wings. He has time to understand that he has left the world he knows with no road back. Olympus meets him without gates or guards. The mountain is a place where weather waits to be told what to do. Columns shine as if washed in rain. Marble floors drink sunlight and give it back as a gentle glow underfoot. The gods look up from their cups when the eagle enters a hall that smells of resin and crushed mint. The bird sets the boy on his feet, and the boy sways once and stands. Zeus stands before him, with eyes that carry the same threat and promise as a storm that has chosen a valley. Hermes appears the way he always appears when the air changes, and matters require a messenger who knows which words to keep and which to say. Here looks from her seat with a stillness that says she understands what has been taken and does not approve of the manner of the taking. Ganymede Lee grunts what it means to serve immortals. He is given a basin of water that smells of laurel. He washes the hands of gods who do not age. He carries a jug of nectar that shines like the inside of a shell. He pours with emotion so calm that even Aries lowers his voice when the boy passes. He replaces he in some tellings, or serves beside her in others, a detail that changes with the singer, yet never alters the sight that mattered to the ancients. A mortal child moving among divine chairs with a vessel that never empties and a face that never shows fear. The cup he lifts is the same cup that will become a stream of light in the sky. The posture he learns in the hall is the posture the constellation holds forever. The world below asks for an answer. A king in Dardania counts the days and does not see his son return with the flock. Tro stands at the edge of a field at sundown and watches the dogs arrive alone. The cry that leaves his mouth is the cry every parent knows in the moment before facts arrive. Zeus does not leave the wound open. He sends Hermes with gifts to soften the blow. horses that can run over sea foam without sinking, a golden vine that coils like a living thing and bears fruit in season. Versions differ on the exact token, which is how memory works. When pain is old, the point survives. The father receives proof that his loss has been honored by a power he cannot refuse. He bows his head and keeps his place among men, who have learned that grief does not end when it is paid for. It learns to sit at the table without speaking. Time turns the boy into a sign. The Greeks do not forget the manner of the ascent. They do not forget that rain rules the life of fields. They let the two truths meet. Aquarius becomes a youth who pours water from a jar into a river that already knows where it is going. When the sun walks this section of the ecliptic in winter months, wet, storms cross the islands, and the mainland breathes again. Sailors mark the season when the jars in the sky seem to spill and call it useful. Farmers watch channels fill and take the pulse of the year and the sound of water moving through dry stone. In some places, tellers braid this figure with older memory of floods, Deucalon and Pyrrha on a raft after a world made new. The pairing is natural, a figure who pours, a world that needs pouring. Painters give the youth a profile that could belong to any shepherd from Ida and set a plain jar in his hands. Mosaics lay him out along the wall of a bath, where steam collects and drips, a mirror of the work above. Gem cutters carve him on stones no wider than a thumb and make the falling water a line that catches light when the seal meets wax. On Roman coins, the water-bearer appears beside a river god with a reed in his hair, a conversation between sky and ground carried on in metal. In every medium, one thing holds. The jar empties in a clean stream that never runs dry. The figure pours as if the arm cannot tire. The stars that carry his shape keep a quiet brightness that suits the story. The luck of kings sits near his brow in a name that wandered west from older speech. Saddle Melik, the lucky one of the king. A wider fortune rests in another light at the shoulder called Saddle Sud, the luckiest of the lucky, a sound that pleases sailors who find it high on windless nights. Lower along the stream lies Sadakbia, the lucky star of tents, a name that speaks of shelter raised against sudden weather. A quick shower of meteors arrives from the same region each year in late summer when most men are too hot to sleep, and so see the brief line sketch the dark without warning. At Aquarius gives that shower its mark in later books. The ancients only said that the night was busy and that wishes came easily to the mouth in hours like those. Her A's anger never leaves the story. She watches the boy pour for her husband and holds the cup in her hand with the steadiness of a queen who knows that dignity can be a weapon. The poets let her words fall in short lines that carry more ice than heat. The tale turns in small ways over centuries. Sometimes the marriage bed of Zeus suffers another wound. Sometimes the queen grows in wisdom and allows the boy to stand. If not in favor, then within the circle of the possible. The constellation does not judge. It remembers. It preserves an image that has power even when the details shift. A youth who rose from a hillside and brought rain to a dry world by lifting a single vessel again and again without spilling. When the figure stands high at night above winter courtyards, you can hear the sound of water from cisterns and gutters, and the trickle-down channels cut through stone in the age before your grandfather's grandfather. Women set bowls along walls to catch drips that will cool the house by day. Men pull cloaks tighter and speak of hills greening in a week if the wind holds. The children of the city trace the line of the falling stream with a finger and try to guess where the river below and the river above meet. The answer is easy for them. Everywhere the cup never empties, the arm never tires. The sky keeps faith with the work that life asks for in this part of the year. Aquarius holds a long tract of sky. The old teachers nicknamed the sea. Fishes swim there, a river runs there, a whale lifts its back there. The water-bearer stands among these neighbors and tips his vessel. So a ribbon of faint stars runs away from his hands. The stream descends toward the southern fish, where a single white fire waits like an open mouth. Full out shines there with the authority of the first magnitude lamp and gathers the falling water as if the heavens had arranged a meeting between a coup, pea, and a thirst. Children learn the trick once and keep it for life. Find the jar. Follow the zigzag that spills from it. Let your finger drift until it touches the solitary bright star that sailors use to steady their course over warm seas. A picture becomes a path, and the path teaches the sky. The jar itself forms a small pattern inside the larger figure. 4 stars mark its rim and throat in a shape that looks like a fork held upright. Gamma, Zeta, and Pi Query set the points. Ancient lists give one of them a name that leaves no doubt about its duty: Hydor, water. From that little cup, the flow begins, a chain of dim lights that takes patience. The bearer's leg holds a clearer marker. Delta Aquari gleams, with a name that sounds like bone and gate. Scat leg, a star you can count on when haze erases the fainter stream, and you need to regain your place. Farther along the figure, the eye finds other steady lamps that watch over the shoulder and back. Each has carried the luck names that came west with traders from an older world. Those names are household charms, whispered aloud as families move across flat roofs to sleep in cool air while winter rain knocks on channels below. This sign reached Greece already old, on tablets pressed beside the lower courses of the Euphrates. A great figure stands with a jar and pours water that becomes the rivers of a country. The scribes called him the Great One. In their speech he stood with ear, Lord of wisdom and the deep. The water was not an ornament. It was law. It arrived in season and made cities possible. The image traveled with weights and wine and tall stories. It met new mountains in a different sea. The jar remained a jar, the stream remained a stream. Greek mouths changed a divine name and gave the bearer a history that suited a shepherd kingdom and a high court on Olympus. The older memory still shows through like a skeek, etched under paint. A man holds a vessel, and the world receives what it needs. Mediterranean weather gave the figure a second authority. When the sun passed these stars, rains crossed islands and peninsulas from the west, heavy storms in some years, and gentle soaking in others. Farmers opened sleighs, cut in dry stone, and watched channels wake with a sound the heart never forgets. Systems filled, caves breathed damp air. Olive roots drank until trunks held a coolness that would last through spring. The season had signs on the ground to match the signs above. Broad gutters along roofs began speaking at once in the dark. Steps grew slick. Markets closed a little earlier because wood smokes poorly in blowing rain. Priests climbed their shrines and poured water in thin lines across altar corners to seal the New Year's luck. The sky poured. The hand poured. The gesture linked temple, field, and chart. Astronomers who lived for details recorded Aquarius with affection because it demanded effort. No blaze draws you in. The figure rewards the trained eye. They wrote that the constellation belongs to the larger set, first written down by Tommy. With a pride that scholars still feel when lists survive wars and bad kings, they mapped the crooked thread of the stream. They set down the jar stars in the right order, so a boy on a roof could fit the pattern without argument. They noticed that a distant cluster sits inside the lines like a puff of breath on a window. On fine nights, it is a grainy pearl. On dull nights, it disappears. They learn to expect swift visitors from this quarter. In the heat of late July, long before midnight, faint streaks begin to arrive from the tract near the water-bearer's leg and jar. The southern delta aquarids send those lines. Old men who never learned the parent comet still taught children to watch from dark beaches, where the sea makes its own steady mushi. Artists placed the youth with his vessel in rooms that always needed water. Bethuus set him in mosaic, where steam collects. He strides along a wall with a jar that never empties, while attendants carry real arii past his tile feet. Houses hung with wintergreen set him over basins in courtyards. The painted stream looks as if it could fall into the real pool that catches rain from the roof. On coins, he stands beside river gods with reeds in their hair, their hands out to receive the sky's gift. Parchment calendars copy him into the months, when jars are checked for cracks and springs, run loud in gullies that would dust in high summer. A city reads itself in such images and keeps customs that reach the stomach before they reach the air. Draw water early, share with a neighbor whose system sits low, carry a cup up the stair to the old man who cannot take the slope in rain. Sailors borrowed the sign for timing. The bearers of cargo knew the weeks when the west would send long bands of cloud and a sea knocked into short, steep waves that break oars and patience. They watched the jar lift over the eastern line after dusk and counted nights until the first strong gale of the season. They shifted voyages from open water to coasting runs. They tightened lashings and accepted the smaller profits that come with prudence. A helmsman who had lost friends did not need omens to tell him what weather does in these months. He wanted a picture that answered the ache in his stomach with a rule he could follow. The jar pouring into the fish gave him that rule whenever the watch called out the figure's rise. The myth tied to the figure never hardened into a single lesson, which is why it kept authority. It told of a boy taken up and given a vessel that never runs dry. It told of rain that arrives when the land goes quiet under bare vines. It told of a father who receives gifts he had not asked for and learns to live with a new kind of memory. The sky held all of that, without anxiety. In one version, the stream that falls from the jar saves a parched field. In another, it becomes the very flood a city fears when river walls fail. Human beings recognized both faces and adjusted conduct. A mason set his course by it when he widened a channel before the storm season. A magistrate set policy by it when he ordered grain moved inland from a low warehouse before the first strong tides of winter. The water-bearer does not speak in riddles. He pours, the world learns to receive and to plan. When Aquarius climbs to the meridian on a clear night in the heart of winter, the towns below offer small signs that the figure has done its work. Laundry hung at midday dries by lamplight, because the air holds chill and damp. Hearths burn lower so smoke will not hang heavy under roof beams. In the dark, a child counts the bright stars at the rim of the jar and traces the crooked stream as far as little eyes can see. The mother finishes a cup and listens to water move in a ronal behind the house. The father checks a roof pot along the parapet and tips it so the basin will not overflow. Above them, the youth continues his motion with the patience that only the sky can manage. One steady arm, one shining cup, a duty that keeps its shape through storms and years. Pisces opens on a shoreline that feels older than maps. The air carries reed smell and cold stone. A wide river slides past with a hush that swallows boot steps and leaves only the beat of a heart for company. Typhon has come up from the earth, and the world has learned its size. Hills shake, temples shed powder, forests bow without wind. The gods take to flight in shapes that will confuse a hunter who tracks by scent and sound. Aphrodite reaches the bank with a child on her hip and a look that weighs choices in. A breath, Eros clings with one arm around her neck and the other pressed to the quiver that seems far too large for a body that light. Behind them, the ground breathes as if a lung lies under it. Ahead, the river offers escape and a risk that matches the danger on land. She kneels at the lip of the water and pulls a length of cord from her girdle. It is simple stuff, twisted fibers that a fisherman would call good enough. She ties one end around the child's wrist and the other around her own. The knot is plain and strong. It carries the thought that matters most when the world goes into fast motion. We will not lose each other. She draws a breath and steps forward. The river closes over her calves and hips and shoulders. A change moves through her body with the plain authority of a survival act. Flesh learns water. Legs soften into a line that can flex. Ankles turn to a tail that answers current. Arms keep their reach for the child. His small feet flash once and then fold into a swimmer's fin. The cord tightens. They go under and the river takes them the way a road takes a rider who knows the turnings. Some versions say 2 local fish rise at once and shoulder the pair through the first pull of the current. The creatures have no fear of monsters in air. They know their own element and work without speech. They carry goddess and boy in the seam where surface chatter gives way to deep flow and then angle toward a bend where the bank leans low. The first gulp of air after a long hold tastes of clay and willow bark. Eros coughs. Aphrodite gathers him against her shoulder and feels the cord tug with the pressure of the water still running off their bodies. When she looks back at the channel, she sees tails cutting upstream. A last flash of help before the fish vanish into gloom. Gratitude does not require words. She fixes the image of the rescue with the intensity of psalm. Bandan, who pays debts, then runs on with the child held close, and the lines still binding them. When the roads are safe again, and the noise of Typhon lives only where the earth remembers injuries, the sky receives a gift to keep from that night. 2 fishes, a ribbon between them that crosses space in a quiet arc. There is no throne here. There is no weapon. There is the shape of a promise, kept with cord and breath. The western fish rests near the great square of Pegasus, in a small ring that old watchers called a cirlet, a chain of modest lights that forms a neat loop over grey water on autumn evenings. The eastern fish lifts its head toward Andromeda, and the thin triangle that marks the place where three bright points make neat geometry out of a corner of the sky. Between them runs the band that binds. At its center, a single star keeps the memory of the knot. Alia, the rope of the fishes, a name from caravan mouths that carried star lore from river cities to harbors and wrote it down with care once it reached bookish rooms. The constellation wears its faintness, like a decision. It yields no roar to the eye. It asks patience. It offers pathways to anyone who will stand with a chart and learn the ground. Start at the corner of Pegasus, where Al-Janib holds the east of the great square. Drop toward the cirlet until your eyes catch the little ring that fishermen fathers teach to their children from flat roofs. Walk the ribbon eastward until the knot star steadies the hand. Lift along the line to the second fish that leans toward the chain of Andromeda. A sailor who can do this without lantern light can find a harbor mouth in fog that only the sea understands. A farmer who can do it from a field path can tell a daughter how to read the sky when spring is talking in the ditch and the frogs return to their small drums. Ancient memory threads other names through these stars. Baby, Loian scribes pressed images of two fishes tied by a cord into wet clay and wrote that the figure belonged to a goddess of heaven and to a power that governs deep water. The great swallow flew in the same region in those first atlases of the night. Traders sailed west with tablets and weights, and stories complete with river smell. Greek mouths recited new episodes, because they had hills instead of endless flats, and a storm god with a different temper. The outline did not change. Tellers kept the cord and the pair. They kept the sense that escape can be a sacred act, and that gratitude earns a place in the sky. Later, Romans followed the ecliptic through the same tract, and stamped the fishes into mosaics that still shine under museum lamps when rain sits on city glass. Pisces held a point that mattered even to men who preferred numbers to songs. The vernal equinox, the place where the sun's path crosses the celestial equator on its way north, slid by slow degrees into this constellation in the age when scholars kept comparing old measurements to new ones and writing surprise notes in margins. The first point of Aries remained a name on paper long after the thing itself had drifted westward across the line into the fishes. The sky forgives such stubbornness. Sailors and priests and calendarmen quietly adjusted their practice. The equinox rose under the fishes. Spring began when the sun reached this invisible crossing. Children still learned to find the knot star in winter and to watch the way dawn moved along rooftops until that day came. A constellation earned a season by the simple fact of where the sun walked against it. Starkeepers gave Pisces details that reward long nights. Beta Purium sits at the mouth of a fish with a name that says so outright. Fum al-Samaka, mouth of the fish. Adpicium holds a title that wandered across centuries like a coin passed from palm to palm. Alf to some tellers, Kulat Nunu to others. A word that remembers buckets and cords and the tools of drawing water. Between these points and many fainter ones lies a galaxy that a careful eye can tease out under mountain air. Messier 74, a pale spiral that answers a small telescope with a sway of starlight, so soft it makes the brain go quiet. The fact does not alter the story. The story becomes larger because the sight is true. The fishes carry a river of worlds behind them and still keep the knot in view. The season of these stars lives in the last stretch of winter. Streets shine after rain. Roof edges drip all afternoon. Nets hang from courtyard lines and dry in thin Sunday. Fishermen sit with awls and wax thread and close a tear while the children watch and do not speak for once. On an open beach, men slide a hull down logs while the tide thinks its way inward. They pause to look up and find the cirlet, then the knot, then the eastern fish, and they nod as if someone had just confirmed the time. In markets, the fish stalls carry sardines with silver flanks and small eels, something like ropes that forgot their stiffness. Women buy salt, boys carry baskets. The light lasts one finger longer than it did last week. A city feels the world lean toward warmth, while the fishes look down with their ribbons stretched tight from mouth to mouth. Poets told the story cleanly, because the image asks for no polish. A woman and a child faced a monster and chose the river together. They made sure they would not lose each other in fast water. Help came from the element they trusted. The help left no name and asked for no shrine. The gift to the sky was the picture of that act, so that no one could claim to have forgotten it. Later centuries add layers to any tale. This one resists even as it accepts offerings. A temple in Ascalon held a goddess with a fish body, and a woman, Face, fisherman in Syria, spoke a rule about leaving one kind of fish in peace. Greek husbands set tiny bronze fishes on household altars when a child was born and thanked the river for opening the year. The core remains. Two bodies move through danger with a cord between them and emerge with breath to spare. The heavens hold them in that posture. The knot bears a name. The ribbon carries light. The river runs through the months towards spring. Pisces holds the last reach of the zodiacal river before the year swings into new light. A dim tracery that calls for patience from the eye and rewards it with a map older than most cities. The ecliptic runs through these waters between Aquarius and Aries, and the planets pass here in slow procession during the weeks when roofs still glisten after rain and fields pull in the first warmth. Watchers in port towns learn the figure by landmarks that never fail. The western fish keeps its small loop of lights, the surlet, above grey horizons on autumn evenings, and again at dawn in late winter. The eastern fish lifts toward Andromeda's chain and leans on the sky's geometry, near the great square of Pegasus. Between them, the binding runs, an angled thread that joins the pair and carries a single named witness at the knot. Our Russia holds that place with steady pale fire, the rope of the fishes, in the speech of men who carried charts along caravan roads and sea lanes. From the knot, a practiced finger can trace the sun's invisible crossing in March, the point where day and night take equal shares. Greek astronomers discovered that this gate slips through the constellations by slow degrees across long centuries. In their own age, the vernal passage sat among the fishes, so calendars and rites took their cue from this tract of sky, and the name of the old first point of Aries lived on paper, while the event itself had drifted into pies. Caesar set the rule with observations that matched and defied memory at once. The sky keeps its shapes. The frame moves. Hellenistic star lists placed the main lamps and then filled the figure with humbler lights that farmers and sailors come to trust more than bravura. Beta at the mouth of a fish carries a name that says so in clear words. Fumal Samaka, the fish's mouth. Ata holds titles that wandered across ages and outlived dynasties. Alerg in some ledgers, Kulat Nunu in others, a memory of buckets and cords and water drawn from depth. Between these points lies the faint smudge of a distant spiral that later catalogues number among their trophies. A breath of soft radiance that appears on high mountain nights when the air has the clarity of cold stone. Men without instruments learned different trophies here. They learned roots from Alusha. They walked their eyes along the ecliptic to the bright head of Aries at Hamal, and used that line to teach boys the path of the sun. The order of months, the reason fields stir when frogs begin their drumming in canals. Pilots who ran coasts in the dark press the same lesson into their bodies. Find the knot, hold the thread, lift to the next torch on seas that test nerve and memory. That is how you bring a hull to a river mouth at dawn with your crew still ready to row. The sign carried meanings that households could use. In late winter markets, the fish tables crowd the lane with bright scales and quick hands. Nets hang under eaves and take the thin Sunday. Boys thread new cord through cork floats, while elders talk about tides and the luck of the week. Women carry salt in baskets and check jars for leaks. Priests mark the evening, when the equal day approaches by rinsing altar corners with water poured in narrow lines. City fathers read out promissory notes that come due at spring planting, then fold mercy into the sums. When a river has run high and left silt in doorways, across the same weeks, the planets step through Pisces as if they were travelers using a ferry. Jupiter, whom the schools gave lordship here, sometimes rules this reach with beneficent pace. Venus finds honor here as an exalted guest in the books of the astrologers, and brightens an evening so completely that even those who do not care for rules look up and speak her name. The sky and the hand work together during these passages. An omen for the cautious is simply a pattern made visible. Men nets before the shores arrive, turn soil while the water still sits in the furrows. Launch coasting runs under a moon that will give you a line to steer by until the river mouth opens. Art kept the pair and the cord wherever people needed to be reminded that bonds carry bodies through fast water. Pompeian floors show two fish, with a band between them among grapes and dolphins and anchors, a domestic sea that glows when morning light enters Athenaeum. Lamps cast the same outline in warm clay over the mouths of oil and send it into rooms where winter gatherings last longer than wisdom suggests. In late antique synagogues and churches, a full wheel of zodiac signs circles a central figure, and Pisces rests in its place with the ribbon drawn true. A meeting of older skycraft and newer faith that says more about seasons than about quarrels. Coins from busy harbors show a single fish arched over legends of safe voyages and fair measures. The kind of small metal sermon that passes from palm to palm faster than proclamations read aloud in a forum. The image enters habit and stays there. A mother teaching a child to tie a cord does not point to the sky. Yet the knot bears a name that any star reader would recognize. Season closes its hand around the figure as winter leans toward release. The rains ease by inches. Hills show a first green pea at spreads like spilled dye. Carts begin to move inland with saltfish for towns that have waited through hard months. Plows bite in ground that smokes at sunrise. On still evenings, you can hear water run under street grates and count how often it pools and falls. Above that sound, the fishes hold their places. The western loop hangs over a horizon with a color like pewter. The eastern head reaches toward the chain of Andromeda, where the great stories of rescue and return take their turns as spring deepens between the two bodies. The line stays drawn. Our usher keeps the knot. That single point carries a lesson that farmers and pilots and magistrates have all used in years that demanded endurance. Tie the lives that must not be separated. Keep the thread visible. Move with the current when the bank gives way, and climb out together when the bend allows it. When the sun finally steps through the vernal gate and day out grows night, the two fishes drift a little lower each evening and cede the ceiling to the ram who has waited beyond the line. The river still runs under the story. The cord still holds.